And this is Mike Fader, Sirius XM Progress 127. Tonight's entire show, the content is dedicated to talking about Syria, but obviously much more specifically the United States' role when it comes to Syria. Our first guest tonight is Congressman Alan Grayson. Hello.
Yes, hi, Mike. How are you?
Okay, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on the show.
Sure. It's been a while. Let's see. Now, let me just mention that Congressman Grayson is the representative for Florida's 9th District, and he previously represented the 8th District. He currently serves on two House committees, Foreign Affairs and Science, Space, and Technology. And Foreign Affairs Committee, he serves on the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee and the Middle East and North Africa Subcommittee. So obviously he's in the middle of all this. I see your op-ed piece today in the Times. And basically the main point here is that the administration has given you one in this proposal to go to, I keep saying to go to war in Syria, but whatever they're calling it. You have a 4-page document, which is unclassified, of information supplied to you to help you decide to vote for them. And then you say you have a 12-page, is it unclassified document. One is unclassified, then one's classified. But you're saying in your op-ed piece that they haven't really proved their case sufficiently. How is that?
Well, we're talking about heavily selective information being provided in summary form in a 4-page report and a 12-page report, and that's it. So on the basis of one-sided information totaling 16 pages, we're supposed to commit U.S. forces to going to war against Syria. I think most people would say that doesn't add up. Mm-hmm. I mentioned in the article, and I'll mention to your listeners, that you contrast that with the Benghazi situation, where Secretary Clinton released all of the underlying emails, all of the underlying communiques, all of the underlying intelligence reports to every member of Congress, including not just the Foreign Affairs Committee, but all the other committees as well, and invited us to come and take a look. Here we have a report that purports to be based upon intelligence reports that are not available even to members of Congress, even though we have classified clearance, much less the public. And I think that if the public is going to be spending its money and shedding its blood, the public has a right to know.
You mentioned also in the op-ed piece that I think it was at the House Intelligence Committee, which perhaps should have even more access. They don't have any more either, right?
No, they've asked for the underlying documents, and as of the last time I heard, they've gotten nothing.
What do you think is different? What has changed, or who is it? What's going on? Why did you get all that stuff from Secretary Clinton and not from Secretary Kerry? What's going on here?
Well, I think in the case of Benghazi, Secretary Clinton knew that she hadn't done anything wrong, knew that her judgment had been sound, understood exactly what the situation was, and realized she had nothing to hide. Mm-hmm. And that the best way to diffuse a situation like that, where the Republicans are screaming for her scalp, is with the truth.
Right.
Now, she couldn't take classified documents and leak them to the public, but she did what she could do, which is to say, you members of Congress, you have clearance to receive classified information. Here it all is. And she did that to Democrats and to Republicans alike. And that, in my mind, cleared the air. I mean, I was able to go on national TV and tell people, I've read every email, and there's nothing there. Mm-hmm. And you compare that to this situation where I can't tell you what's in a classified 12-page report, but
unless you want to go to Hong Kong and
Yes, the 4-page unclassified report is nothing but one side of the story. It only gives you information that would lead one to think that we ought to attack, no information that would lead one to believe we should not attack. And you can, as for the 12-page document, I couldn't possibly tell you, but you can draw your own conclusions. And then, on top of that, even members of Congress who have clearance, every one of us, aren't allowed so far to see any of the telephone calls that they received, any of the human intelligence that they obtained through their spies, any of the military readings, the satellite reports, nothing. There's hundreds of pieces of information that they claim are going into this decision, which are invisible even to members of Congress.
Well, obviously the president said he's going to go on national TV on September 10th, which, it's upsets me a little bit because obviously what is the next day, September 11th? And I mean, I'd be amazed if there wasn't a little, pitch in the speech on September 10th, a little catch in his voice about the next day.
It's worse than that. I mean, they're planning to have the Senate vote on September 11th.
I noticed that. So this is really,
This symbolism could justify warfare.
So when all these, let me ask you this question, and since you're a lawyer, you're an attorney too, and clearly you know about the Constitution, is it actually legal for the President of the United States to be taking the country into a war without, I mean, obviously we could talk about the Declaration of we could talk about the Constitution and the War Powers Act, but still, is it legal for him to be taking the country into a war without providing the information that you as a congressman ask for? If you ask for this information, is he legally bound to give it to you?
Well, I'm not even sure how one would vindicate a right like that. The courts have said that they regard cases like that are brought to the courts as political questions, and they don't want to have anything to do with that. I mean, the courts are unwilling to act as some kind of arbiter, a referee between the executive branch and the legislative.
Well, there's
branch.
something to
One
that.
of the fundamental problems, though, is that often the most powerful effort to keep this information secret comes from the intelligence committees themselves.
Mm-hmm.
The intelligence committees are populated with members of Congress who are extremely conservative and like the idea that they have secret knowledge that they don't have to share with anybody else. It's already a matter of public record that on a different subject regarding the NSA, I asked for information months ago from the Intelligence Committee, and I couldn't even get it from the Intelligence Committee. The boys like to play with their toys, and in this case, that means keeping the rest of us out of the game and in the dark.
Well, apparently, the president, as he did, what would happen in Libya? Could you describe the difference between, what happened in Libya and what's happening here? Well,
I don't purport to be an expert regarding what happened in Libya. I was in Congress and out of Congress and now back in Congress, so I may not be the best source of information in that regard. But in the case of Libya, essentially NATO was united in that action, and there was the cover of that sort of multinational organization that was taking multinational action. The same thing was true with regard to our attack on Serbia. It was a NATO operation. Here, they can't possibly do that. The British already said they want no part of this. And by the way, the British said they want no part of this on the basis of exactly the same information that we're being asked to reach the opposite conclusion on. The British had all this information, and they looked at it and they said, "No, we don't want to."
Well, wait a minute,
with 10-foot pole.
Are you actually saying that they had more? The British Parliament had more information to vote on than you all have?
They had at least as much as what we have. It's actually a little bit difficult. We've made an effort to try to figure out exactly what they've had. They can't obviously share their intelligence reports with a member of a foreign body like the U.S. Congress, but it appears to me that they had, I'm sure they had at least as much, and it appears to me that their intelligence reports were probably more detailed, as far as I can tell, than a 12-page report that only gives one side of the story. And it's extremely selective. I have to tell you that any situation like this is obviously complicated. There's all sorts of facets and nuances to it, and we're in a situation now where not only are we getting a very selective reading of the facts, but there's an active suppression of any contrary information. The president and Kerry and others have said specifically that they're flooding the zone. And what they mean by that is that they're trying to dominate the conversation about this and exclude other points of view and other sources of information. And so you get into situations where there appear to be leaks of the information that even members of Congress have not been allowed to see. And the leaks make you scratch your head and wonder how reliable is this information that we are getting. And how is it that we could possibly let only the proponents of war have control over all of the information regarding the pros and cons of that war? Haven't we seen that movie before?
The one of the problems, it seems to me, is I think this is the secrecy that bothers Americans, voters, citizens. It bothers Americans as much as anything else about this is the secrecy, because it's coming on top, as you mentioned earlier, the NSA, right? So this is a case of secrecy upon secrecy upon secrecy, and I think that's what people resent as much as anything else. For instance, my point of view, just as a lay citizen, is he's coming on TV on September 10th. I would like him to get a bunch of charts out and graphics and show me the satellite pictures. You know, everybody knows that we have satellite pictures, so show me the satellite pictures. Tell me where the intelligence came from. Tell me everything. You know what I mean? He could go to Congress, but he could go straight to the voters, whose taxes it is, right? And he could ask me, after showing me. First of all, I want to know where the intelligence came from, and maybe you feel the same way. I'd like to know exactly what the detailed plans are. Did they present these to you? If something happens, if this happens, then what about that happens? I want to see, because in Iraq and Afghanistan, people didn't plan for what was going to happen, and we see what happened there. I mean, to me, it doesn't seem like such a far stretch that the Syrians, supplied with some very advanced weapons by the Russians and having a pretty tough army and Air Force, are they just going to sit there and not respond with missiles and rockets of their own to whoever attacks them?
Well, one of the disturbing elements of this whole experience is that the White House floods the zone with information about the gas attack and completely ignores any real discourse or conversation about what will happen the day after we attack them.
Right.
They simply wave their hands in the air and say, "Don't worry about it. We have intelligence." I don't know if they mean that in the literal sense or in the metaphorical sense, but they claim this kind of omniscience to go with their omnipotence that will magically protect the U.S. from any sort of counterattack, even though Syria and Iran have a mutual defense pact, even though there are U.S. warships in the Mediterranean.
And Russian warships. And Russian warships.
Even though Russia has military aides all around the country who could easily be killed by any U.S. attack on any military sites. Mm-hmm. Even though the Beirut embassy is 15 miles away from the Syrian border, which is a 2-minute missile flight and also a 2-minute MiG bomber flight. And Hezbollah is literally right down the block from the U.S. embassy in Lebanon. Even though the U.S. has embassies in Israel and certain functions in Turkey, which I won't go into, that are vulnerable, it's easy to anticipate that there could be a counterattack either by Assad or by Assad allies or by Assad proxies. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we're at war. I mean, clearly, it's easy to see that if the Syrians blew up the U.S. embassy, then everyone would be screaming for their skulls.
Well, what happens if they launch a few missiles out in, I don't know how far away the United States ships are. All this is, I suppose, classified information. But what if they somehow manage to destroy some U.S. military installation, or they manage to launch, a couple of missiles that do find a U.S. ship, or they shoot down an American fighter bomber? Then what?
Well, I think what you just described is what would have been the Tonkin Gulf incident if, in fact, it had ever occurred.
Right. It's so. In other words, not only do you not have, as a congressman, especially you're sitting on these committees, you don't have the intelligence, but you don't have a detailed plan about what will happen specifically if something else happens. In other words, the plan of the military and the United States government, if there's retaliation or if this happens or if that happens. Do you not have that?
Well, I'm not going to tell you what we have that might be classified or unclassified, but I think you can be guided by what's been told to the public. The Kerry and every other administration spokesman just sort of brushes off the entire subject when it's addressed publicly and brought up publicly, and I don't think you should assume that it's any different when there are private conversations in secure facilities.
Well, let me ask you this question. What if, in fact, they gave you all the intelligence and you were satisfied with it? I mean, this is...
then we'd be at a sort of a threshold position to make some kind of judgment on the merits regarding the military action. I mean, my feeling, and it's interesting that we could talk about this for so long and not even get to that point, but my feeling is that even if there were evidence which the administration concedes it doesn't have, that Assad actually ordered the attack, even if the administration's body count weren't 4 times higher than anybody else's.
I noticed that, yeah, now that you pointed out.
Yeah. Even if there weren't all these discrepancies in the record, we'd still be left with the question of what is the proper function of the U.S. military. And the reason why the president is getting zero support from the Republicans, and in part the reason why the president's getting something around the order of 30% support from the Democrats in the House, is because most people have a conception of the use of the military that's fundamentally different from his, apparently. I mean, most people have the conception that the U.S. military is for defending us and our allies, and not for humanitarian relief in the form of bombs and missiles. That there's been extreme resistance on the right for a generation to this notion that the military should function like social workers, and that is certainly true under current circumstances. But even on the left, people scratch their heads and they say, well, let's assume for the sake of the argument that the military should validly be used for this purpose. What good is it going to do, and is it worth the risk of war? Clearly, the options, the military options that are being contemplated right now, basically missile strikes and bombing and so on, those options are not going to change the government. They're not going to remove Assad from power. In fact, it's more or less the express policy of the State Department that they don't want that to happen at this point because they're concerned about who would replace him. Beyond that, it's not going to end the civil war. That's hopeless. I mean, at this point, it's almost a proxy war between crazy Shiite fundamentalists and crazy Sunni fundamentalists. It's drawn crazy Sunni fundamentalists like a magnet now all year long from all over the world. And we have Saudi Arabia backing them up. So, well, I mean, I'm not comment on classified information, but there's been reports of that. And so, so you ask yourself, well, okay, will it actually prevent a chemical weapon attack in the future? Answer is no. All right. Well, will it reduce the stockpiles of chemical weapons in Syria that could be used in a future chemical attack? Answer no. Because the only way to reduce the stockpiles is to blow them up. If you blow them up, you create a vast cloud of poison gas that rolls over the landscape. I think you can see how that's going to end up. Even the military actions being contemplated right now wouldn't even reduce the amount of poison gas available to be used by the Syrian army. So what, I mean, aside... And then you get into the question of what happens. I mean, there's significant evidence at this point that the rebels have used poison gas. So are we going to bomb both sides? Right. That seems crazy. Well, so as you pointed, you go down the list, you point out everything that it is not possible to do and what is not likely to occur. So what is it that the government imagines, and then use that word specifically, what do they imagine is going to be accomplished by launching these missiles and using these fighter bombers? Now, last I read in the New York Times, almost every single day, almost every few hours, there seems to be a creeping expansion of what the military's goal is there, which is no surprise to anybody. But the syllogism that they're putting forth to the public, which does seem imaginary, is that as follows: they claim, without any evidence, that Assad personally ordered the attack, and they actually concede they don't have the evidence, but they claim that anyway. Okay, it's just bizarre. They say Assad this, Assad that, Assad the other thing, when in fact they have already conceded publicly they have no evidence of that. So the first proposition in the syllogism is Assad ordered the attack. Second proposition is if we militarily attack and weaken him, then he will feel that he was punished for that attack. And the third proposition is that if he feels that way, it's less likely that he'll do it again in the future. Now, there are all sorts of problems with that syllogism. starting with the fact that the administration concedes that they have no evidence that Assad actually ordered the attack. I pointed out in the New York Times article that there's now an alternative explanation that's out there.
Right.
And the alternative explanation is that it was, in essence, a rogue operation by part of the Syrian army. Now, actually, there is circumstantial evidence to support that proposition because Assad's winning the war. Why would he want to upset his progress by using an unnecessary chemical attack? So, there's circumstantial evidence for, circumstantial evidence against. But the point is that even the first proposition, which is that Assad ordered the attack, is at this point in some doubt based upon published reports. Then you get the question of, well, okay, we will deliver some kind of rap on the knuckles with him militarily, but as I indicated before, it can't be a rap on the knuckles that involves even reducing the amount of chemical weapons available to him. So it has to be some other kind of rap on the knuckles. Whatever else we do, the Russians have already promised that they'll replace whatever we destroy with new and better stuff that kills more people more effectively. And so it seems that we're playing something of a losing game in that regard. And then there's the third part of the syllogism, which is that he's less likely to do it again. I don't know. I mean, at that point we're delving into the psychology of a dictator. I don't really feel qualified to make that assessment. But even before you get to that particular part of the assessment, it seems like a very problematic syllogism.
Well, one of the things that we're hearing in speeches especially from Mr. Kerry, who is extraordinarily aggressive here, much more than I ever imagined he would be, but all things considered. But when we're hearing from him and from the president and some other people, is that this is also a lesson to other bad people who might use chemical weapons.
You see, that's got to be one of the worst arguments of all. And it's interesting because he's constantly referring to Saddam Hussein. By the way, I do need to mention that sometime in the next 10 minutes or so, someone will be the 75,000th signatory to our petition.
I'm sorry. I should have brought up your. Why don't you mention the petition that you're circulating?
Yes, I'm mentioning it now because somebody's about to be number 75,000. We're right now at 74,978. It would be great if there was someone from your show who were listening in who became the 75,000th person to support our petition. Our petition is at don'tattacksyria.com. And the petition is a petition to Congress that simply says don't attack Syria and gives some explanations about why that is the wrong thing to do at this point. But anyway, getting back to what I was saying,
it's a lesson. It's a lesson to other bad actors if we do this.
Right. There's a constant reference to Iraq, unfortunately, because obviously that was an unfortunate circumstance from start till finish, including botched intelligence and false intelligence.
Well, also including
statements to the public.
And also, if we're talking about bad actors, unfortunate is that we supplied chemicals and helicopters used as chemicals to Saddam Hussein. That's unfortunate.
Right. But here's somebody who used chemical weapons, purportedly had weapons of mass destruction. Just the possibility that he had weapons of mass destruction was enough to motivate our government to occupy his country, defeat his military, to force him to live literally in a pit under the ground for months on end until he was dragged out of the pit and hung. So I think if there's some kind of sense we're trying to convey to people that they shouldn't have weapons of mass destruction like poison gas, if that doesn't do it, I don't know what will. What are we supposed to do, draw and quarter them?
Well,
so I mean, that point has already been made. And that, also makes, in that context, it sort of makes you wonder how plausible it is that there was an order from the top to go ahead and use this poison gas.
There's a lot of people who are concerned. For instance, I signed your petition. Other people have signed it. I know that I've mentioned on various blogs and websites and on various shows I have. But then there's a lot of people who think the way that you do. You may be thinking, I shouldn't assume how you're thinking, and that I do, that I'm opposed to this for many various reasons. But then there's something that's nagging in your head, and maybe you can address this, is, well, he's already killed 100,000 people here, and there is maybe an evolving kind of international law, which there was an op-ed piece again by somebody else in the Times last week, and he may be coming on the show, about the evolving international laws, and I think there's an actual phrase for it. Let's see, it's called responsibility to protect. I guess you've heard that, right? that nations who have the power to do this should not stand by and see genocide committed internally in a sovereign state.
I agree with that. If you're talking about genocide, there's no evidence this is genocide. This is a single military operation that was carried out for an apparent tactical purpose.
I guess I'm sorry.
Let me put it this way.
Yeah.
If what were happening here was that we were seeing the government of Syria systematically killing Christians within Syria, that would be a whole different story. Actually, what's happening is that the government has been protecting Christians from the rebels killing them. But again, I'm not trying to be an apologist for the Syrian dictatorship. Far from it. I am saying that in fact, I agree in principle that we should use the military to protect ourselves, protect our allies, and prevent and defeat genocide. I agree with that. But that's not what this situation is. And, the fact that it's not that situation is emblematic of the reasoning behind what the other 194 countries that have decided not to lead an attack into Syria are thinking. Turkey has almost exactly the same capability from much closer range to do what's being contemplated here as the United States does. Israel could do it 10 times over. Israel could do the kind of attack we're talking about without breaking a sweat. You don't see that happening. That's not what's being contemplated here. Even though both of those countries have much more at stake militarily than we do.
I'm sure they.
What it comes down to is this. Genocide, that's a different story. If that were the case, then there'd be an argument to be made. In this case, basically, we are acting like the Lone Ranger, and that was a bad movie.
It was a good radio show. I listened to it in the 50s before it went off the air. So this whole idea...
Well, in the 50s, this might have actually worked, but right now it's a different world.
And also, I think, people are very tired of all these wars and all the lies that went into starting the wars, aren't they? I mean, they just fed up. I read these articles all over the place. Republicans, Democrats, they go home to their districts and they hear from people, especially in right-wing or even Tea Party districts or solid Republican districts, even military base districts, that people are being told overwhelmingly, do not do this, right?
Well, Joseph Stiglitz, who is a Nobel Prize economist, wrote a book called The $3 Trillion War, which he then later updated into The $4 Trillion War. And he demonstrated that just in economic terms alone, the war in Iraq was just devastating to us, and it will be a generation, really, before we can hope to recover from it. That war cost us 8% of our national net worth. If you add up the value of everyone's home, all the factories in this country, all the real estate, all the stocks, all the bonds, all the savings that people have, what's in their checking account, what's in their savings account, what's in their IRAs, their 401ks, add that all up together, we blew 8% of that on the war in Iraq. And people have this deep understanding that there's something really wrong with the U.S. economy, and I think you and I both know what that is. It's being choked by unnecessary spending led by the U.S. military.
So the people can go to don'tattacksyria.com to sign this petition, right?
Right.
And last question. Let me ask you this last question. Let's say now we're talking about an executive that's I'm talking about an executive that seems to have been carried away, and it's not just this particular president. It's been going on since World War II. This whole idea of treating Congress as if it was an afterthought. I mean, even the War Powers Resolution seems to be a kind of a diluted version of what the Constitution originally provides. But I personally, I don't know how you feel about this. I mean, you can express your opinion or not. I would like to see the Congress vote against this, no matter what their whatever their motivations are. This is an odd group of strange bedfellows we're talking about. We've got liberal Democrats, or a lot of Democrats who are more progressive, teaming up with a lot of Tea Party and very right-wing or even conservative Republicans and so everybody's got a different motive to prevent him from doing this. There are some people in Congress, obviously, who want to prevent him from even turning over in bed at night, right? That's just because he's who he is.
Well, I know there's been a lot of talk about that, but I see it differently. Everybody's against this except for a very small number. The current whip count by the Washington Post shows 25 House members in favor and 224 against. That's a 9-to-1 ratio. Literally 90% of the members who have declared their intentions it's saying that they're going to vote against this or they're leaning against it. And that obviously includes many Republicans, but also many Democrats. The president is losing among Democrats by at least 2-1. Some of the estimates go as high as 4-1, depending upon which whip count you look at. And obviously, because he's the leader of our party, I think the Democrats in general feel they have to tread a little bit more carefully. They don't want to do anything that would injure him unnecessarily. My feeling is that we're doing him a favor, because if we vote against this, we save him from the fate of the Johnson administration, where all of those brilliant domestic initiatives like the Great Society program ended up in flames because Johnson could never put the war behind him.
I do think it would be a good thing, and I agree. And also I think it would be a good thing for the American system, which has sort of gone out of balance, if Congress was to exercise its authority, as in the Constitution, and tell him, no, we can't do this now. You know? Well,
that's where we're heading, and I think that the vote at this point is almost assured. I mean, I can't predict what cards may be in the president's hand to play in the next few days, but I will tell you that I haven't heard anything new for a long time. What the president is saying today is exactly the same as what the president was saying yesterday, the day before, and even last week. And it's the same thing with Secretary Kerry. All they're trying to do is what mathematicians sometimes deride as proof by repetition. If you can't prove it by logic or by facts, you try to prove it by drilling it in. And I don't think that's going to work. I think that based upon members' public statements, in fact, most members of the House have made up their minds, and overwhelmingly, they've made up their minds that this is just not a good idea. It's not our responsibility to act alone. It could go wrong in all sorts of ways.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very dangerous thing to do. We're not going to actually accomplish anything useful. And it is amazingly expensive. I mean, people talk about billions of dollars being spent.
Well, I do worry. About, there are famous speeches in history that have turned the tide at the last minute. He's going to speak on the eve of 9/11. He's going to appeal to, patriotism. He's going to talk about terrorism. Next day is 9/11. Thing like that is a very powerful thing if played right. And I use that word played specifically. I worry about that.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. A number of members of Congress have actually released information about the emails that they're getting from constituents and the telephone calls that they're getting. And both Democrats and Republicans are reporting numbers over 100-1 against. And there's just no way the president's going to be able to turn that around. In fact, it's going to get worse. We are doing, I think, a very good job in galvanizing opposition to this. And by the way, in the course of our conversation, we did, in fact, go over 75,000 petitioners at our website, don'tattacksyria.com, and I'm hoping that one of your listeners ended up being the 75,000. But what we're doing is, once people sign up, we're not only asking them to make calls, to send emails, we're not only giving them telephone numbers or email addresses that they can send their information to, but also we're taking their information and showing it to their congressman. It's a very powerful thing when you walk up to somebody on the floor of the House and say, here's a list of 1,000 of your constituents who wrote into us and said that they want you to vote against the war.
Interesting.
That's a very powerful thing. And that's really the secret weapon here. The public is inflamed. It's not that they're tired of war. It's that they're disgusted with war. Although the people in favor of this action are what they are and they feel what they feel, and the president is obviously one of them, and even though the polls show that 2 or 3 Americans are against this for every one who's in favor of it, that understates the adamancy, the insistence of the opposition here that they don't want America to go to war.
I also hope that part of this disgust is against the out-of-control executive, in every way, with the NSA, as you mentioned, and with this, and with all sorts of other things. I mean, they seem to have their almost like that's their own personal military, their own personal government down inside Washington that has no real connection. I mean, most people feel completely alienated from their own government now. And I hope this is a turn in the tide,
It's the out-of-control security state, which President Obama has done nothing at all to curtail, and in fact, he's allowed it to expand to the point where even reporters are now part of the dragnet. And investigative reporters who are trying to expose wrongdoing on the part of people in the government now have a record of every call that they make, every call that everyone makes, turned over to the NSA. So, I mean, you can see where that's leading, and I regret the fact that we have a Democratic president who has allowed that to continue and shows no sign of being willing to put his foot down to curtail it. So you're right. I mean, this is the fact that I can't even though I have classified clearance, I can't see classified reports that relate directly to this war pitch that's being made to us is part of a much greater problem, which is that the security state, as I said today in the New York Times, is choking on its own phlegm.
Well, Representative Alan Grayson, 9th District, is it, of Florida, right?
Right.
Thank you very much for coming on, and I appreciate you circulating this petition, and glad, as always, that there is an actual voice that people can identify with in the Congress, because there's very little of that. Thank you.
Well, there's a voice that people can identify with on the radio. That's yours.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Care.
All right. See you.
Bye.
Bye. All right. This is Mike Fader, Sirius XM Progress 127, and we are now going to go to a break, and then we'll come back, and I would like to take your phone calls on this. By the way, the whole night tonight, we're going to be talking about the United States and Syria. We're going to talk about Congress. We're going to talk about intelligence, about what the military situation is over there, what the motives are, why it is that the United States and its allies, secret and open, have not pushed for as many negotiations as they should. Who's behind not negotiating here? Is it just the bad guys and the Russians and the Iranians? Is it just the bad guys against the good guys? Are we going to stay children about this all the time? It's just black and white. So I'd like to get your calls, 866-997-4748, because I don't know how you feel, but this scares me. And I don't mean it scares me personally, because you know what? I have already lived a lot longer than I ever thought I would. And, you know, I get blown up. So what? You know what? I'll go to wherever it is I go, flap around with my wings, play the harp, the Jews' harp in this case. But if you... I've got children. You have kids. You have grandkids. You know, I don't want you. If we launch these missiles, I say we. If the United States government, you see, that's the saddest thing of all. I can't say we anymore. The United States, because they're not. They have nothing to do with me, and I have nothing to do with them. If the United States government, which is like a separate group of people, launches these missiles over there into this powder keg, this insane, psychotic, fundamentalist chessboard of lunatics over there. If they launch a missile into this area and there's a war, and that stirs up enough of a hornet's nest so that people come over here 100-fold to try to blow up our cities, really? Who's going to answer for that? Who's going to be responsible for that? I have my own attitude about exactly what I would do in this instance and in most of the instances militarily in the country. But I really do want to hear your calls. So let's go to a break. When we come back, we'll go straight to your calls. Yeah, just like the United States military. All right, who do we have? Mitch from New Jersey.
No.
Another Mitch.
Matt.
Who is it? Matt. Well, your name is actually Matt from Michigan. Okay, Matt from Michigan. And now you're finally on the air. Go ahead, Matt.
Hello?
You're on the radio. I guess we better move on. Okay. What's happening there? Hold on one second. We're experiencing technical difficulties. What do we have?
Hey, Mike.
Yeah. Go ahead. Speak, whoever you are.
Do you hear me?
Yeah, I do. You're on the radio. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. If the president goes ahead with this military strike, you know, in the face of overwhelming congressional opposition, which I certainly hope that we're going to get, I mean, that really raises the question of what does democracy mean anymore in this country?
Mm-hmm.
And in this state of Michigan already, I mean, a year ago, the people of this state voted against Governor Snyder's desire to take over the city of Detroit. But, you know, earlier on this year, he went ahead and did it anyway. So the voices of the people, or the votes of the people of Detroit, already don't count.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what our recourse should be if Congress, you know, doesn't approve this authorization, this war strike, and the president goes ahead and does it anyway. On Friday, I went ahead and called. I don't have a lot of faith at this point in the whole political system anyway, but all week long, I've been playing the game. I signed Alan Grayson's petition earlier in the week. and I called all my representatives. And then again on Friday, I called my representative, who's a real reactionary Tea Partier, Dr. Benishek. And how he's a doctor is like beside me. But in any event, I urged him to bring forward articles of impeachment against the president if, in fact, Congress overwhelmingly opposes this and he does military.
Oh, yeah. Let me stop you right there. I mean, if the Congress, after all this consultation and everything that we've been talking about, if they go ahead and they vote not to go along with this proposal, it's called a proposal to attack Syria, and he does it anyhow, then he should be impeached and removed from office.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd like to see him impeached just because he didn't go after the Bush crime family, but that's my own personal pet peeve, among other things. But I know that these Tea Partiers are just itching to impeach him anyway for whatever reason, but I'm not going to oppose it. I'm not a Democrat anyway, but I'm certainly a leftist, and I know they're horrible racist motives and everything else, but I don't care. I just don't care. Yeah,
see, I think you put it perfectly, because that's the thing I think that's troubling a lot of people. And we're going to have a guest on at 6:00 to talk about exactly this issue, is that a lot of people are united against him, but a lot of those people are right-wingers, Tea Parties, and conservatives who don't like him because he's black, don't like him because they imagine in their daydreams he's a socialist or whatever it is. In other words, there's a lot of stupid, ignorant motives to get rid of him. And these are the same people who vote against everything he proposes, no matter if it's good or bad. Now, those are the people who are actually in unity with people who are more intelligent and informed and think that he's clearly, gone beyond his powers in the Constitution. So it's an odd group of people who are opposed to him. But like you say, I agree with you. It doesn't matter anymore. And it'll be a lesson to every president afterwards to stay within the boundaries laid out in the Constitution.
No, I think it will be a lesson, and even maybe just last for a short period of time, but I think it would even hold back a Republican president with a Republican Congress for, 1 or 2 terms or something like that, maybe. But this executive power has to be cut back. And the Democrats, they keep trying to blame all this on the Iraq War, which, of course, was a disaster. But this suspicion of the government, it goes way beyond just the Iraq War. You've got all the NSA spying, the fact that you've got, Chelsea Manning, a person that reports American atrocities, he ends up in prison. So the Democrats want to point this all on George Bush, and he certainly deserves boatloads of criticism. But this general suspicion of government, it breaks into the fact that the bankers weren't prosecuted, everything.
No, it goes across party, it goes across decade. It's something that has to be slowed down and stopped. And I have tremendous hope, and I hope that even though he's going to make this, this manipulative speech on the eve of 9/11, that he gets his ass kicked and that the president gets back and put in place where he belongs. I've got other calls, and I should move on.
Good weekend, Mike.
Okay,
Bye.
You too. All right, who do you have? Paul from Nebraska. You're on, Paul.
Hey, Mike. Okay, look, first I'll start off by saying I oppose going to Syria. So having said that, I'm going to also say that how can we get, 432 members in Congress? How can we get 131 more like Grayson in there? I'm not from his state, and I sent him money for his reelection.
Yeah, same with me. I agree. I agree with, yeah.
Yeah, the man is very logical. Now, I understand why we on the left oppose war, because I've opposed war at all times. I just got to ask a question, and you will understand what I mean by this. If this was President Romney right now, under the same circumstances, do you even think the NSA would have been an issue with the right, or going into Syria would have been an issue? See, that's my problem. It's their reasoning isn't the same as ours, and I know, wars make strange bedfellows, so causes, but I can't align myself with the right, and to say that you're going to go ahead and impeach a president, which is what the right is asking, and to go ahead and tell me because he's a Democrat. Because if you remember back when Clinton wanted to go hit Kosovo, you heard the same stuff from the right. We had just finished hitting Iraq the first time, right? And it was all justified because it was George Bush, the Republican. Kosovo had more horrible crimes, and we on the left were against that as well as the first hit, but then the right was against it because it was Clinton, a Democrat. Then we invade Iraq, the right was all gun-ho and waving the flags, All of a sudden, now you got a Democrat and Obama. They're against any kind of action.
All right, let me answer that, and then I'll move on to another call. I know what the motives are of these Tea Parties are. It has to do with bigotry. It has to do with ignorance. It has to do with small government, which is absurd. It has to do with all kinds of things that I completely disagree with. They want to impeach the guy anyhow just because he's black to begin with. If he goes ahead and starts a war, could be World War III, and involves all this money and all this death again in violation of the Constitution, then he absolutely needs to be impeached. And I don't care who's in bed with me. Okay? And I don't even care if my wife hears that. We got to move on. Take another call.
All right.
Yeah. Who do we have?
Mitch?
South Dakota. Yes, you're here. Go ahead.
Oh, hey. Hi, Mike.
Hi.
That was a terrific interview. That was just absolutely terrific.
Well, I like this guy. He's intelligent. He's logical, and he says what he means, you know?
And he speaks to the people. He speaks in a tongue that everyone can understand.
Mm-hmm.
Like, really nice.
Mm-hmm.
So it's cool. Anyway,
Yeah.
I just wanted to say Lynn Samuels would be proud. That was just the most amazing interview, and that's what I wanted to say. And I'm an avid listener, and I enjoy your show tremendously, and I think you're doing terrific work.
Well, thanks for calling, and I appreciate it. Yeah, Lynn. I never forget Lynn. I think about her all the time. It's going to be almost 2 years.
I do, too. I think about her every single day when I'm on the road.
Yeah, and I wish she was around right now. I'd love to hear what she had to say about all this.
No kidding. Boy, that would be terrific.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for calling. Who do we have? Diane. You're on, Diane.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call.
Yeah. I should tell you, I only can give you about 2 minutes because we're at the end of the show.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. All I wanted to say is I really, really dislike everyone has accused the president of going in without Congress's approval, without him doing a thing. We have tried him by consensus rather than by act. And I think that is wrong. It's like we're jumping on the same bandwagon. As you
well,
say,
nobody's accused him of going anywhere. Apparently what happened was, what seems pretty obvious is that he was all ready to do this until the British Parliament voted against their own prime minister going along with it, because he was ready to do it as long as he had the British and the French as allies, and that was a shock to him. And then he went over to Congress. So nobody's accusing him of doing anything. What people are accusing him of wanting to do something which is completely wrong without any explanation to the representatives of the people in the United States. That's what people are accusing him of.
Well, I think he has a right to his opinion. If Congress doesn't go along with it, of course, then he should respect that. But I think we should wait to see what he does before we crucify him.
No, he needs to be told that he can't do this. That's what we need to see. We shouldn't wait anymore to see what the president's going to do, because the president.
I don't mean that. I don't.
Yeah.
What I mean is everybody's climbing on what he's going to do it. We should impeach him, and that's basically what I'm hearing.
No, then you weren't listening. Diane, you weren't listening. What we said very clearly here was that if Congress, the representatives of the people of the United States, tell him not to do this, and he does it anyhow, then he should be impeached.
I know that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
That if he does it, then he should be impeached.
Yeah.
It's still like saying, if you do that again, I'm going to punish you. It's like you've already shown me that it's inappropriate to do, but now you want to threaten me too. I mean, I think basically letting him it be known that the majority of the people do not wish for us to go into Syria. That should, and maybe mention that it is an impeachable offense, but to say we want to impeach him sounds like, we're waiting for him to do something so we can jump on him and impeach him.
Well, the Republicans are, which is why I pointed that out very clearly. I distinguished that from, the Republicans want to impeach him just because he's in the White House. That's not my attitude. My attitude is to hold him responsible as a symbol of the executive, which has been out of control for the last 50 years, not to go ahead and disregard the wishes of the American people. If you watch what happened at the hearings the other day, Kerry told everybody who was questioning him to mind your own business and do what he told them to do. It was outrageous. I mean, you had Rand Paul from Kentucky, too bad it had to be him, telling him, look, you can't come here and tell us what to do. We tell you what to do. You work for the people of the United States. And Kerry sort of dismissed him and said, yeah, we'll do what we want anyhow. It's outrageous. Anyhow.
Well,
I got. Go ahead. I'll give you the last word.
Okay.
You got like 20 seconds.
Okay,
Go ahead.
I just want to say I'm hoping that he does what is right and honorable and goes with the Congress and shows everybody that, yes, he is an honorable president.
Okay. Thanks for calling.
Thank you. Bye.
Sure. Okay, this is Mike Fader. The second hour is coming up, and we're going to talk more about Syria. We're going to talk more about this odd phenomenon, actually, politically, of the very right wing and the very left wing in Congress, and in this case, joined by people in the middle, so it's quite overwhelming. But this strange bedfellows theory here, and practice of what's going on. So we'll be talking about that after 6 o'clock, and we will continue to talk about Syria, the military situation, politics, and everything that's going on here in the Constitution and the president and the executive as we go on towards the end of the show. And this is Mike Fader again, Sirius XM Left. I keep doing it. It would take me about a year to do that. Sirius XM Progress 127. And we are here every Saturday night from 5 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 2 to 5 Western Time. As I often mention, and especially on these particular issues that are concerning us right now with the U.S. and Syria, if you want to find out more about, want to get in touch with me, you can go to my website. It's Faderfiles, FEDERFILES.com, FEDERFILES.com, and you can get in touch with me that way. Sign up for my mailing list, find out what else I do on the radio, things that I've written, and that's the way to do that. Also, I write a political blog on Facebook, and you can get there by Googling or, whatever your search engine is. It's called Occupied Territory. Just put in Facebook and Occupied Territory, and it will take you right there. One of the things that we talked about earlier, one of the things that's obvious to everybody here who's following this, is the strange bedfellows phenomenon writ large. And we're going to talk to somebody right now who has written a really terrific article about this. I recommend everybody read this article called Lord Help Us, Only Republicans Can Save Us Now by Andrew Levine. Hi.
Hi.
Let me introduce you, and then we will plunge into this here. Andrew Levine is a senior scholar at the Institute for Policy Studies and author of many books and articles in political philosophy, including The American Ideology and Political Keywords. And his most recent book is In Bad Faith, What's Wrong with the Opium of the People. Could you tell us about that a little bit?
About that book?
Yeah.
Well, that book is a book that grew out of a course that I taught for many, many years, not actually in political philosophy, that started out as taking as its premise the idea that rational theology had been undone effectively by the 18th century. And so the question became not any longer whether it was rational to believe in God, but why the belief persisted in the face of not exactly evidence to the contrary, but that the belief wasn't sustainable according to all the usual standards for rational belief acceptance.
And yet it perseveres everywhere.
And it perseveres everywhere. And the thing that interested me, because this brings it a little bit closer to things that I actually know something about, is that a lot of the great social theorists and philosophical interpreters of the 19th century and the early 20th century, in one way or another, took this as their point of departure. So some of the group, they are generally called the young Hegelians, of which Karl Marx was one in his youth. One of their leading figures was someone named Ludwig Feuerbach, and he wrote very interestingly on this subject, in which what he argued, in effect, was that he really argued against sort of village atheism. He argued that while the beliefs were not only false but plainly false, that they expressed something that was humanly significant, and that this therefore called for interpretation and a kind of empathic understanding in a way that was instrumental for ultimately moving beyond them.
Yeah, I think that's something that's a very useful thing to think about even now when we're up against that. In fact, it still pervades all these political issues that we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, but then other thinkers too. In fact, all the great founders of the major traditions in modern social theory, like Emil Durkheim, Sigmund Freud. In fact, Freud was the one in The Future of an Illusion and in Civilization and Its Discontents who formulated the problem in roughly the way that I just expressed it. And Friedrich Nietzsche, of course. The gist of which, what emerges from all this is at least what I argue, and it didn't really become clear to me until I had actually written the book.
Yeah.
What emerges from all this is that there's a kind of bad faith in the sense of self-deception in a lot of religious ideation and practice. So that what's objectionable about it, because often people, there's a religious left that does, as it were, God's work.
Sure.
Often throughout the world. But what's objectionable about it is that they're not really. There's a level of self-deception in the way that these positions are advanced, and that's a kind of normative critique, and that was the point of this.
Well, let's transition into. I mean, speaking of civilization and its discontents. Clearly, we're at a position where it looks like Thanatos, as Freud predicted, is overtaking Eros, so that we are going to be talking about America and Syria here. Yeah. So let me start off, because I like the way you write here. So I want to start off here. It says, in Gulliver's Travels, Jonathan Swift has his heroes say of the inhabitants of Brobdingnag.
Yeah, that's the second voyage.
Brobdingnag. Right, second
that's
voyage.
Where the giants live, not the little people.
He says, quote, I cannot but conclude that the bulk of your natives to be the most pernicious race of little odious vermin that nature ever suffered to crawl upon the surface of the earth. And then you say, Gulliver might have used those words just as appropriately to describe the House and Senate Democrats as they mobilized to support Barack Obama's looming Syrian war. All right. Yes, indeed. So, but the point, one of the points of your article here is that what we have is the strange bedfellows taken to its supreme condition in this case, right?
Well, we have the bedfellows being a handful of liberal Democrats who are willing to stand up against Obama and the massive Republicans. Is that what you mean? Which bedfellows? Hello?
Yeah, sorry, our equipment is failing us a little bit here. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, what I meant specifically in your article, as you point out, is and only Republicans save us now, is what you've got is a lot of Republicans, the large majority of Republicans, but a lot of conservative, even Tea Party Republicans, who have come around all the way in a way to sort of join hands with very liberal Democrats to be extremely vociferous in this issue and push the engine almost, which is stuck in the middle, to push these people to join together in preventing the executive to being out of control here. Yeah. So that's a phenomenon that you don't ordinarily see, and yet you're seeing it more often now. First with the NSA. I mean, I have a program here which is ostensibly and very often a radical, left-wing or let's say liberal radio program, politically speaking, although I don't like labels, but that's how it generally falls out. But I'm getting many more people all the time over the last few months calling me from people who are self-identified as Tea Partiers or on the right, telling me that they feel exactly the same way I do. They may have slightly different motives or even larger motives that are different, but they feel the same way I do in this one issue, that we have an executive out of control, especially in an example like this where a war may be declared just personally from the White House.
Yeah.
So this is what we've got.
Yeah. I at least have the sense that Obama I mean, Obama started out running to the right, even going back in the earliest days of the Democratic primaries. The only major contenders that ran to the right of him among Democrats were the two that he empowered, Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. And his early appointments and the general style of governance in the beginning were, I think the word that was frequently used back then was disappointing, and became increasingly, astonishingly disappointing. But it's only been in the past few months that it's moved to a qualitatively different level. It's not just that, of course, he represents the interests of Wall Street. All American politicians do. It's not that he maintains the standards of the empire. He stewards the empire the way that one would expect an American president to do. But the revelations about surveillance and his reactions towards those revelations, and now this with Syria, just raise it to a whole different level. Mm-hmm. It's that he's really on a roll, and it's increasingly astonishing how. And it occurs to me that there's a common thread throughout all this, because in both instances the issue is not so much. The only issue is embarrassment. Right? I mean, the real problem with the NSA revelations is that not that they have harmed anybody yet, at least in any demonstrable way, but that they've embarrassed a lot of people, and they've certainly shown up the ineptitude of governance. Mm-hmm. And the problem with the issue in Syria is that he very stupidly drew a line in the sand, which may or may not have been crossed, but which at least is represented as having been crossed. Mm-hmm. And he boxed himself in.
Is this a political incompetence, a failure to understand political strategy and what the public thinks?
Well, I think there is a lot of has been for a long time a lot of incompetence about understanding the Middle East and what's involved in intervening into the Middle East.
But I mean, I meant that even almost in a more sort of psychological, political way. In other words, don't make remarks like that could be so easily turned on you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that clearly is something that someone with more governing skills would not have done.
Well, unless you have somebody like George Bush Sr., who draws a line in the sand and then knows very well what he intends to do about it in advance. But,
Yeah, but he was fairly careful to get his ducks lined up before he did that. Mm-hmm. And handled it fairly competently, at least. This has not been handled competently.
Well, something you mentioned here, too. You say, had Mitt Romney won in the fall of 2012 instead, and had he proposed anything like what Obama is planning for Syria, we can be sure that Democrats would by now have overcome their inherent pusillanimity. You want to explain pusillanimity?
Well, just cowardice.
Cowardice, right. Yeah, but, it's a great word. And would be united in an effort to stop him. They would have a good chance of succeeding, too. In other words, we're talking about also this whole concept of the lesser of two evils, too.
Yeah. Well, there's some precedent for that, isn't there? Because not in the run up to the Iraq War, and especially not at the time of the beginning of the Afghan War, but by the 2006 election, Democrats were pretty well mobilizing against Bush, and policy was changing because of that. It would have changed even more had the Democratic Party leadership not held them back. I mean, at the very least, there could have been hearings. Mm-hmm. There was ample talk before the election about impeachment. None of that ever came to fruition.
Right.
There were certainly ample grounds for at least broaching the issue, and it never happened. But they were the party leadership was too intent on cautiously advancing the cause of electing a Democratic president, mm-hmm. and so nothing came of it. But once they had a Democratic president, it's just rally around him, cut him endless slack, instinctively allow him to make excuses for him, apologize for things, And it's just gotten to the point now where, at least in this instance, Republicans are probably more reliably anti-war than Democrats will be.
And let's see. Well, I just want to read this other part too, and have you comment on it. It says here we even have Democratic Party front organizations like MoveOn.org pulling its left-leaning membership over to whether to support Obama's perilous self-serving folly.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I got an email that they're taking a vote as to whether we should support intervention in Syria or not. I haven't heard anything subsequently, and I gather that they're not supporting it.
No, they're not. Actually, I received that email, and then I got one, or I got wind of one later on, that they had decided that they're not supporting it. But this is really fascinating to me here, and maybe you could amplify. You say the lesson is plain. Lesser evils are not always worse, or what comes to the same thing. When we look at the larger consequences, it is not always obvious who the lesser evil is. Not as obvious anyway as it is usually supposed. So there are people who argue that in some cases what appeared to be the lesser evil here has turned out in some unusual and odd, maybe perhaps unpredictable ways, the greater evil.
Yeah, because a problem with lesser evil arguments is that the people who advance them tend to be very short-sighted. Mm-hmm. So, of course, if you're comparing Obama on any number of dimensions to Mitt Romney, especially the way Mitt Romney was presenting himself in this latest, in that last incarnation of him. Mm-hmm. There's no question who the greater evil is. It was Romney, but the consequences, a consequence of supporting Obama is what we had just been discussing. It's that it made the Democratic Party leadership and much of its membership even more spineless than it had been before, and effectively neutered it. So there's very little opportunity. There's very little likelihood of a sustained opposition coming from that quarter, especially because it's been clear for a long time that the Obama administration and the leadership of the Democratic Party were utterly contemptuous of the party's liberal, not to mention.
Oh well, that is extraordinarily. And so, I mean, first of all, they take the votes for granted, and then they just dismiss it as a bunch of whining. I mean, they know that there is no place else for this group of people to go when it comes to voting day. You know.
Yeah. For instance, to go back to 2011, mm-hmm. Even before the Occupy movements, this is something that has a special resonance with me because I lived in Madison, Wisconsin for a very long time. Okay. When there was a genuinely sustained uprising against the Republican governor's attempt to very radically curtail long ago gained labor rights, mm-hmm. And when it involved substantial labor participation, in fact, it was led by public sector workers. Mm-hmm. And when the state Democratic Party was very actively engaged on that side.
The National Party was nowhere to be found.
And Obama was nowhere to be seen.
Mm-hmm. That was quite an extraordinary thing. I mean, that was...
And not only was he nowhere to be seen, but behind the scenes, he was able to steer things into an electoral route where they ran a kind of anodyne Democrat against the governor, mm-hmm. and Obama couldn't even bring himself to support the Democratic. The day before with a tweet. I remember
that moment, and the fact that he was fond of traveling all over the United States and raising money for the Democratic Party and raising money for.
He was in Minnesota the day before,
and yet he couldn't find it within him to walk into that state and make a speech supporting his base and the Democratic Party base for generations.
And the Democratic candidate, who had been the mayor of Milwaukee, and had fairly strained relations with the black community in that, and which is almost entirely concentrated in that area in the state. Had Obama appeared, it would have been very helpful. and it might have changed the election.
Well, there's all sorts of. I have many guests who come on here and explain very clearly why it is that the Democratic Party is the way it is, and it has to do with business and money. But here's something else from your article. It says that, which something I think people should remember, that, and I'll just mention it and not read the whole paragraph. Mr. Obama was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yes,
and this is.
He was a constitutional lawyer too.
Yeah, and he's awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, and he's getting ready to pick up a phone, or however he does it, and launch missiles into a place which is essentially the world's powder keg.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is what the Peace Prize has. This is what we have the Peace Prize.
Yeah.
Something else here that you mentioned is, and this is something I think I'd like to hear a little commentary on. You say right-wing ideology and anti-Obama animosity, which we know about, and we can see that they're against him no matter what he does, have become entangled with the Tea Party's take on patriotism, according to which, by jingo, nobody gets away with dissing the USA. So you've got this really strange phenomenon of the people who are screaming and yelling USA, USA, and it doesn't matter who he drops the bombs on, as they say, anything bad or look funny at us, right? The uber patriots.
Yeah.
And they are having trouble. How do they, in their own minds, in what passes for their own consciousness, how do they harmonize that attitude, USA uber alles, with, opposing a war against, vicious Islamists?
Yes.
How does that work?
Well, they're going to have to. I don't like to usually put things this way, but I think this is a case where it's appropriate to say it's a matter of what narrative gets accepted. If they think, obviously, neither Tea Party Republicans nor Obama Democrats care much about what happens to Syrians.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't care much about violations of international law. In fact, as we know, they're serial violators of international law.
Mm-hmm.
And in this instance, in order to supposedly, according to the official narrative, in order to punish a violation of international law, they're going to violate international law by starting a war that is illegal,
mm-hmm.
because it doesn't have UN sanction and because it's not a war in self-defense.
You think maybe he's looking for another Peace Prize?
I don't know.
Yeah. Anyhow, so here we have this phenomenon of the people who are self-appointed patriots at the head of the marching band, right. And they're opposing a war against our hated enemies, the terrorists, quote unquote.
Right, but it's about credibility. If they perceive it as Obama got himself into this fix, then and they want to hurt Obama,
mm-hmm.
they'll decide one way. If they perceive it that it's a threat to the United States' credibility is at stake, then it'll be a different story.
Well, clearly, what seems to be developing is that this person, Mr. Obama, has isolated himself. He's painted himself into a corner, and it really is becoming clear, as what you just said, that it is his credibility. It is not the United States' credibility.
Well, I think it's both is the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're basically like a gangster organization, you can't say X, have X be defied, and then do nothing about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was Obama who drew the line in the sand, but it was also the President of the United States who drew the line in the sand.
Well, as I was talking to my guest in the last hour, and we went over this whole idea, which is pretty well accepted by now, but people who are paying attention, is that the executive has gone way out of control as far as checks and balances go. I mean, they have their own sort of security state, and, Congress is an afterthought. So to me, it would be hopeful to see this Congress, whatever the strange conjoined motives are, it would be hopeful for them to do what the British Parliament just did and put a stop on this kind of thing.
Well, it would be helpful to them to vote against it.
Mm-hmm. That's what I want to see.
Yeah, and it looks like that's in the cards now, at least unless things change in the next few days.
Well, being a student of philosophy and a professor once upon a time of philosophy and history and politics, I know you're familiar with the fact that sometimes very rousing speeches at certain moments in time have changed things. And a man is going to give a speech on the eve of 9/11 to Americans to do the right thing. You know? So I don't know what will come of that.
Yeah, it's not impossible that minds will change, but right now things are looking fairly good for a vote, not only in the Congress but even in the Senate.
Mm.
In fact, I just while I was waiting for your call, I just glanced at the Huffington Post, where they have statistics now about how many confirmed yeses and nos and unconfirmed leaning one way or the other there are, like they run before elections.
Mm-hmm.
Now, but of course, you're right. That could all change. I think what could very likely happen also is that, unlike David Cameron, if the vote does go against Obama, that he'll ignore it.
Well, you know, if you saw Kerry testify the other day, and there was this extraordinary video of Rand Paul, you know, Ray, your article, of Rand Paul being the one to lecture him and say, you know, you've come to the right place. We're the ones who declare war, and we are the representatives of the people of the United States. And Kerry basically just waving him off and telling him, you know, yeah, whatever.
Yes, that's right.
It was extraordinary to see that. Yeah. Absolutely extraordinary. They should play that over and over again.
It's extraordinary that Kerry has emerged as the most vehement defender of attacking Syria now.
Well, especially after he goes in front of Congress in 1971 and talks about and denounces the Vietnam War for the crime that it was. That's the right. Same man.
That's right.
Oh, well. Anyhow, Andrew Levine, where can people read your articles?
It's in Counterpunch. It's in the weekend edition of Counterpunch. It's counterpunch.org.
Okay, thank you very much for coming on.
All right, thank you for having me.
Okay, we're going to take a break now, and then we're going to go to another guest who's going to talk even more about the shenanigans of Congress and Congress avoiding its responsibilities and maybe finally living up to it. And that will be with John Nichols, who is the Washington correspondent of The Nation. So we'll be back after this break with our next guest. And this is Mike Fader, again, on Serious Progress 127. With all this talk about the president and the state of war and everything being out of control, and most Americans clearly not wanting this, but it could be that the president will just wave them away and do it anyhow, which is extraordinary. I believe that would be an example of the fact that the president has lost control of himself and has assumed a level of arrogance and dictatorship that he would have to be impeached. And again, I want to emphasize over and over again, it's not just this president. I mean the presidency. This has happened far too often over the last 50 years, and especially since George Bush going straight into Obama. But in the midst of all this horror and bad news and all this struggle, there is hope, and one of the hopes is that the Congress of the United States will restore its natural, balance by forbidding the president to act in this manner, and by proving it by absolutely refusing to fund anything he does, and by bringing impeachment proceedings. On the other hand, on a positive note, the question I was going to ask Alan Grayson, which I didn't get to ask him because he had a limited amount of time, was what can we as average citizens do? I mean, I get all kinds of, we can sign petitions, and that's always possibly a useful thing to do. Also, I was urged by Move On and other places to call up my senators, and I know a lot of you've done this, and I even did it. I rarely do this myself because I'm so cynical, but call up your senators and call up your Congress, the person who's in Congress who represents your district. I called up, and of course, all the mailboxes were full. They couldn't accept any calls. And in my case, it was Senator Charles Schumer, who is the hand puppet of Wall Street and will go along with whatever, the corporatists tell him to do. I mean, you notice, in fact, that how corrupt and how morally corrupt and bankrupt the Democratic Party is. And it's sad at this time when the Republican Party is clearly unified in one crazy right-wing direction. It's very sad to see the Democrats basically also corporate prostitutes, because you've got Harry Reid, Nancy Pelosi, and all the leaders of the Democratic Party have been employed, are agreeing with the president, and are employed to pressure their members into doing this. There's so much good that could come of the Congress refusing, the House of Representatives, and even perhaps the Senate. So much good could come in American history. It could be like a tipping point where we go back into having an actual democracy as planned by the founders. So much good could come of a vote against this, refusing to allow him to do this. It would be a great turning point over decades of extraordinarily accumulated, out-of-control executive behavior, which involves spending hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions of dollars, and invading other countries, creating wars, overthrowing governments, assassinations, and no knowledge of, very often by Congress, and no approval by Congress. However, also, as Mr. Grayson pointed out, Congressman Grayson, a lot of the people on these places like Senate Intelligence and the Senate House Foreign Affairs Committee, they themselves are corrupted by power and corrupted, for all I know, by money too. And so they're all in the pocket of the same people as the president. Having said all that, you know, if you really want to help people, there are 3 million refugees now. This is a country, I think, of approximately 26 million people, roughly that number of people. 3 million refugees. More than 10% of the population of Syria has fled over the borders of Syria into Turkey and Iraq and into Lebanon. And some of them have wound up in Jordan. And, you know, there are like 1 million children we're talking about. Children who have no responsibility, no understanding of this kind of bizarre, stupid, testosterone-fueled, tribal insanity that makes their world a horror. They're just kids, right? If you want to help these people, and especially you want to help these children, then donate to UNICEF. There was a picture in the New York Times today, a photograph, and I don't think it was intentional, but there was a photograph of a refugee camp, which was in, I think, Lebanon or Iraq, where refugees from the fighting in Syria had made it over the border and were finally actually safe, at least temporarily, from the war that is right now just in Syria, although it's leaked into Lebanon. If we send missiles in there, it'll spill over into other borders too. But these people were safe. And there was a father smiling and kneeling behind his little daughter, who was about 3 years old. And behind them was a makeshift tent that they put up to protect them from the elements. And, you know, winter is coming, right? And in big letters, it says UNICEF. The United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, is an extraordinarily valuable organization in the midst of all this insane, crazy warfare and fighting and drawing lines in the sand and tribal and fundamentalist sects fighting with each other and weapons manufacturers and arrogant people like Kerry having wars because they feel like it. Children are at risk and children are being killed, innocent children. And if you want to help children out, you really actually can help children. This is something you can actually do. You can donate to UNICEF. Just go to UNICEF, find it online, and give them some money because they are providing food and shelter for the people who are being chased out of their own countries by war carried on by these monsters who are out of control, including our own president. So who do we have there? Oh, by the way, everybody, if you want to call now, I think we're not able to get in touch with our guest. Something perhaps something has gone wrong with the timetable or with the phones or something, but we can't reach our guest. He's not available at the moment. If you want to call, let's go. Let's do it. 866-997-4748. Give us a call. We're talking about life and death here. We're talking about a war that our president may commit unless our Congress forbids him to do it. It's one of the most dynamic and possibly exciting moments in U.S. history for a long time, which could even restore a movement towards democracy, as complicated as the motives of the people involved are. Who do we have? Mike in Annapolis, you're on.
How you doing?
Hey.
You know, I'm all worn out. I'm tired of it. I'm 50 years old. I'm tired of wars. You know, I didn't vote for wars. But, you know, I'm also tired of listening to the talk about, let's impeach him. Let's see what he does first before we decide whether we want to impeach him or not.
That's what we were talking about all night long. That's what we've been saying here all night. Let's see what he does. If he does something that he shouldn't do, then let's impeach him.
You know, right now he's doing what a representative democracy wants him to do. He's going to Congress. But people are saying, let's impeach him. You know, let's see what he does He's doing the right thing right now. Why are we calling him names?
You know what? He was shamed into doing the right thing because the British Parliament voted against his pal Cameron. Otherwise, he would have just gone and said, Cameron and Hollande in France, we've got NATO. We're going to go ahead and do it, and we'll talk to Congress after we launch the missiles. He was shamed into doing it. He didn't voluntarily go to Congress.
I'm not going to argue that with you. You might be right. We don't know that. You might be right. But what I'm trying to say is that right now, he's doing the right thing. The one I'm really pissed off at is Kerry. Here's the guy that sat in front of Congress when he got back from Vietnam. Oh, no war is the way to go. We should never go to war.
Mm-hmm.
War should be the last thing. And look at him. Now he's a hawk all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's really. I don't know. It's an astounding change, and also, it's interesting too. He's the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State is there to talk and to negotiate with other countries, right? If somebody's hopping up and down for war, it should be the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It should be the head of the Defense Department, both of whom were sitting right next to him the other day, being very reluctant to do this.
He sits there and he says they used chemicals, and children died. 100,000 people died in this war already. You're telling me that they're less dead because they were killed by bullets or other bombs other than chemicals? And now he's upset by it? I mean, come on, man. The hypocrisy is just, it stinks.
Yeah, it's really extraordinary. Also, did you see, do you have access to this, to YouTube or to videos of any kind that you can see? Yeah.
I've seen a lot of it.
This thing that happened with Rand Paul. Did you see that dialogue between him and Rand Paul?
Yeah.
It's amazing. Rand Paul there, who can be very, very.
Is what it is.
Yeah.
And my wife's got a friend that's in Jordan, and they've got young children, and they're terrified. They don't know what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Jordan's population has gone up 12% since this war started.
Yeah.
From all the refugees. It's horrendous. I don't want to see anybody die, but these people have got to either get his ass out of power,
mm-hmm.
or they've got to they've got to do something. But people in the region are terrified. Like I said, my wife's got friends that live in Jordan, and man, they are absolutely terrified.
Well, they should all be terrified, because if those missiles get launched from these U.S. ships and U.S. fighter bombers go in there, a lot of civilians are going to get killed, no matter what they say about their pinpoint. Civilians are going to get killed. Russian advisors and Russian citizens are all over the country. If they get killed, then what? They have a gigantic naval base which house Russian nuclear submarines and Russian missile cruisers on the coast of Syria, right? They have armed Syria with very advanced anti-missile missiles and missiles and surface-to-surface missiles. The Syrian army is a very tough army. Just ask Israel. Then there's Hezbollah. Then there's Iran, who wants to launch missiles at Israel. And then there's Israel that would be very happy to blow up Iran. And all we need to do, maybe, to set this whole thing off is launch these missiles.
Yeah, I know. We've really got to step back. And I'm with you. I think what Kerry's got to do is he's got to open up a dialogue with the Assad regime, and just say, look, you need to leave, take all your money, whatever, take all your riches, and just get out.
And you know what? Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, and I think everything will calm down. But the problem with this, everybody says we need to go to the United Nations. Look, the Russians could be shown a picture of Assad launching a rocket with chemicals in it, and they'd still make excuses. They're never going to they're never going to agree with whatever we want.
Mm-hmm.
China is the same way. They could have pictures they could have audio of Assad saying, launch the chemical weapons, and no, that's not him.
Obviously they have their reasons for that. Russia and China are brutal military dictatorships. So they don't want a brutal military dictatorship to be intruded on, because they're one themselves. The other thing is with the Russians, they have a huge client there, Syria. They have a huge client for military weapons. They have sold them billions and billions of dollars of weapons. Also, Syria has given them their Mediterranean naval base. This is a place where they have a tremendous military presence thanks to Syria.
You're right. And it's a shame that
it's a shame that human lives. I guess it's been this way all through history.
Yeah.
All through human history. But it's a shame that it's all coming down to money. It's all about money all the time. Also, it's never about what's right and wrong. It's all about money.
Yeah, money and power, and men. I don't know what it is, but men.
Yeah, I know. That's the whole thing. I mean, it's just crazy. When is it going to end? I mean, I'm 50. I'm going to be 52 years old. I'm so tired of war. You know what I mean?
I know.
It's tough. I can remember when I was a kid laying in bed listening to the Vietnam casualty numbers every night.
Right.
And going, man, I sure hope they resolve this war before I get old enough to go.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's terrible. I mean, it's one war after another. We're in a state of perpetual war.
Well, like that famous song, "Fixing to Die" rag about Vietnam. I mean, there's plenty of money to be made. So Wall Street, get in on it. The weapons manufacturers in every country make trillions of dollars selling instruments of death. They're not going to back off. It's money. I got to move on to another call.
Okay, man. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks for calling. Did we take a break? We did, didn't we? Yeah. I think we did take a break between guests, and the guest didn't. Yeah, okay, so who do we have? Robert, go ahead. You're on, Robert.
Yeah, hi. I do agree. I think that at the moment, Obama's doing the right thing, saying let's consult with Congress. And I agree with you that if Congress says no, don't do it, and he does it anyway, then he should be impeached.
But also, I'm sorry to interrupt. He's not consulting in good faith, as everybody is making it very clear. Like this congressman who was on the first hour, he is receiving, short little documents saying that this is what he should do, and he should give the president his approval to do this based on no information. In other words, he's not really consulting with Congress. He's telling them what they should do.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I think that I think Congress doesn't have to do it. He can tell them all he wants, and if they don't, and if they say, "Look, we're just not buying it," then he hasn't made his case. He has the responsibility to make the case, and his war powers are, I think, limited to responding to an imminent threat. And if you've got time to go ask, it's not imminent. Mm-hmm. So obviously, he's overreaching.
Well, since you mentioned that, there is something called the War Powers Resolution of 1973, about which we should know more. But what happened was they passed this law in 1973 because Nixon was not listening to Congress to slow down and stop the war in Vietnam. Ultimately, they passed the War Powers Resolution, which is kind of a diluted version of the constitutional authority of Congress to control what happens with a war of the United States. And it says here, as stated this is a letter sent by a congressman to try to prevent all this. As stated in the War Powers Resolution of 1973, absent a congressional declaration of war or authorization for the use of military force, the president, as commander-in-chief, has constitutional power to engage the U.S. armed forces in hostilities only in the case of a national emergency created by attack on the United States. That's it.
So he has absolutely no right to commit our forces to doing that. Now, if he'd gone through the UN or something, then we could say, well, we have an international treaty and we're responsible for upholding our treaties, and that's one thing. Mm-hmm. But he does. So again, like I say, I'm absolutely 100% in favor of impeaching the man if he does this because he's outside. So now, as an extremely liberal person, mm-hmm. Who is also strategically thinking this stuff ahead, imagine what would be the case if you thought. Can you imagine if he was trying to get this past a Democratic and Green Party Congress instead of a Democratic and Republican Party Congress? Hmm. He'd have no chance at all. We could forget about this stuff, right? It wouldn't even be chatting about this. So if you want to have space to get that Green Party in, vote the Republicans off the island. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying that's how you do it strategically. Because right now, voting for the guy I want will get the Republican elected, and that is a blank storm of major proportions, right? Mm-hmm.
Did you? I'm sorry. Did you want to say shitstorm?
I did, but I'm trying to clean up my language here. You know what I mean?
Good for you. Good for you. And it's not even New Year's.
And it's not easy given the level of frustration I'm dealing with. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I know. Listen, I'm getting a signal. I should move on and take another call. So.
All right, bro. Take care.
Yeah, thanks for calling. Who do we have? Joe in Indiana, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to ask, why would you be willing to impeach the president over Syria if he goes it without congressional approval? He's already done that in Libya.
Have you been listening to the show?
Well, for the last half hour.
Oh, well, I thought I made it pretty clear, even in the last half hour, it's very clear in the Constitution who has the power to declare war. Even in this something called the War Powers Resolution Act of 1973, the president has no right to do this unless Congress approves of it. So if Congress doesn't approve of this and he takes any kind of action, then he is violating the Constitution and needs to be impeached.
Did you want to impeach him over Libya?
You know what? I had serious thoughts about that. Yeah, we had the discussion on the air about that too. And in fact, a lot of people agreed that he should have been impeached over Libya. And this is the reason why. And there was a continuum of opinion on this. One was that he went in there under the War Powers Resolution Act, which shouldn't exist anyhow. It says that the president can go ahead and if he's like along with NATO or a group of our allies, he can take action like he did in Libya. And then after 60 days, he has to report back to Congress. And he didn't. He waved them off. At that point, he was in violation of Congress. And then when he got good and ready, he went and he stopped things and he went to Congress to report after the fact. At that point, people were starting to talk about impeachment. And it's not just him. It's the added cumulative effect of presidents for the last 50 years assassinating foreign leaders, overthrowing governments, and starting wars all over the place without going to Congress or even lying to Congress.
Okay, now would you be willing to impeach the president over violation of domestic law?
Yeah, that all depends what it is. But tonight we're talking about Syria. Sure. I mean, after all, I mean, if he, I know you're setting me up for a Second Amendment argument here, right?
No, I'm not.
Okay, go ahead.
If the president just ignores a law that he signs into law, and he just ignores portions of that law for the benefit of him politically, should he be impeached?
Well, I'm not a constitutional lawyer. If the Congress passes a law and the president signs it, and for instance, all these signing statements that started, I don't know where they started, but the person who really went to town on it was George Bush. And I think Obama's done that himself, too. I think the very idea of a signing statement is illegal. If Congress passes a law, the president should veto it or he should sign it. And if he vetoes it, it goes back to Congress, and there's a provision for that. They could override the veto. But presidents have been creating or committing what I would call impeachable offenses, that is to say, ignoring the Constitution, for the last 50 years, and it's getting worse all the time. Somebody's got to put a stop to it.
Okay, so in other words, when Obamacare is passed and it says that congressmen and their staffs are under Obamacare, and then the president, by his own authority, basically says, "We're just going to ignore that. And we're going to give you allocations to make up the cost."
Mm-hmm.
Nowhere in the law, okay, is that an impeachable offense?
You know, I don't know because I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but if the president is violating a law passed by Congress, he could be held in contempt of Congress and he could be possibly impeached. Yes, that's the generic answer.
My point would be this. This president, talk about the imperial presidency, this guy really thinks he's the frickin' king.
Well, no worse than George Bush. He's just continuing what Bush did.
Can you give me something where George Bush went out of his way?
You're joking, right? That's a joke.
Let's hear one.
Did you ever hear the Iraq War?
The Iraq War, wasn't there a vote in Congress for the authorization of the Iraq War?
Yeah, after he lied to them about the intelligence that the whole war was based on. That's an impeachable offense.
You mean Bill Clinton's CIA director?
No, I'm talking about George Bush. He sent his national security people to the UN and to the American people, and he himself, they all lied to us to start a war. They should all be in jail for that.
Okay, and so Hillary...
Is that a good enough answer for you? You know what? I don't want to get into this little stupid, knee-jerk, conservative Republican talking points, debate with you. We're talking about the Syrian war. Do you have an opinion here?
I don't think we should be in the Syrian war because basically you can't trust Obama.
Okay, thank you very much. I really do appreciate, in the deepest possible way, your opinions. Is that it? No. All right. You know what? Anybody who's on the line right now, why don't you hold on, or since we've got a little bit of time until we're up at the end of the hour here, but we're going to continue this whole conversation. I want everybody who's listening to sort of vote tonight by calling up and expressing your opinion one way or another. But I don't want to go off into little, piddly little arguments and having little sort of right-wing, left-wing, Obama's awful and nobody else's arguments. It's just too childish and menial and petty to entertain my brain with. All right? Can we rise above these stupid little arm wrestlings that have to do between right and left? That's what we're trying to do here, isn't it? We're trying to unite to stop an imperial presidency. And as I pointed out, and I'll point out one last time, it's not just this guy. It's the one before him and the one before him and the one before him and all of the presidents since Roosevelt. All right? So anybody who's hanging on right now, what I want to do is get everybody to call up tonight. You're all back from vacation. We're about to go to war, possibly. And it's wrong and it's illegal. But there's other issues. There's complex issues here. Do powerful nations like the United States have the right in let's say, in conjunction with other nations like NATO to stop mass murder in other sovereign countries, to just cross borders with missiles or troops or planes and actually interfere with the activities of a sovereign government? Do we have the right to do that? And people are saying that we do. If we're seeing mass murder of one country, one group in a country over another group, tribal or religious or something, or some designated group of people, do we have the right to do that? Either stick around or call us back after the 7 o'clock news, and you will be on the radio, I promise. And this is Mike Fader, Sirius XM Progress 127, where we don't just talk, we do. We do. Once again, if you want to get in touch with me, express your opinion, you can do that by going to my website, Fader Files, FEDERFILES. So check out other things I do on the air and books and articles I've written. You can do that there. I urge all of you to do it, and join my mailing list. If you want to call up and you want to have an argument with me about abortion, guns, the Second Amendment, and how Obama is a socialist, please don't. Save it for another millennium. I'm not interested. We're talking about larger issues here tonight, and that is the point, that people on the right and the left are finally shedding their assumed identities or labels that they call each other, that they call themselves, and uniting as American citizens against an executive which is run amok. Now, people are doing it for different motives. Some of them, I think, from my point of view, are wrong, and some of them are right. But at least we have that in common. And if we could all understand what the larger issue which is that we have a presidency, which again is not just this one, but the one before and the one before that, et cetera, et cetera. The last one, which I noticed, although it wasn't perfect in any way, which didn't go out of control, oddly enough, was the commander-in-chief in World War II, Dwight Eisenhower, who became president later on, and did not approve of these kind of extraordinary and extra-legal military adventures. And that's one of the great ironies of American history. After that, everybody was in it. So we have some calls on the line, right? We're not going right away. Just in a second. I want to mention two things here to make sure that the conversation gets a little jazzed up. One is that, and people have a wider area to comment on. I have in my hand, I'm holding right now in my hand, like they used to say in, old congressional hearings or, newspapers. I have right here in my hand the proposal that was sent by the United States government, by the administration, to Congress that they're supposed to approve. And it mentions throughout the whole proposal that the attack will be to deter Syria's use of weapons in order to protect the national security interests of the United States. Any page of this proposal keeps saying over and over again to protect the national security interests of the United States. They have to say that to make it legal, but it's not true. There is no way whatsoever that I can see that launching missiles into this area right now at this time in the way they intend to do it and for the purposes they intend to do it in any way will protect our national interests. In fact, quite the opposite. It will stir up an entire war in the whole region, and it will provoke people who are on the borderline right now to come over to this country one way or another and try to blow it up. It's going to create trouble for our national interests. It's going to affect our national security in a bad way. It's not going to protect us at all. It's going to harm us by doing this. You know, there comes a time where people in the United States, especially the people who run the United States, or maybe they're average citizens of the United States, have to understand this is not our planet. It wasn't signed over to us. You know, we don't own this planet. We don't run this planet. We're not the policemen and we're not the landlords of this planet, right? That's not our job. If I was in charge of everything right now, I would retreat. There is nothing wrong with the word retreat. A lot of people have it in their heads, especially people who call themselves patriotic Americans or whatever, that there's something actually generically wrong with the word retreat. No, there isn't. It's a word which is perfectly as good as advance. There are times in your life, and you know this in your personal life, right? You've got to know this if you've got any kind of experience or intelligence. There are times in your life where you have to back up, you know, financially, emotionally, circumstantially, at a job, in a marriage, with your kids, with your friends. You know, you have to just lay off or back up. You have to retreat. Sometimes you have to acknowledge that you've gone too far and you have to pull back. You have to, there's nothing wrong with this. These things are seen in America as cowardly or unpatriotic. Retreat, withdraw. No, they're not. They're just words that are just as valuable as actions and intentions as advance or insert or whatever the opposite is. So retreat is what America needs to do now. We have to retreat in a million different ways. We have to take our soldiers and sailors and aircraft and drones and military bases and all this stuff and our spies out of the rest of the world almost entirely, leave enough in there to try to protect our national interests, right? But we need to retreat. We need to come home and fix this country. Charity begins at home, right? We've got a vast army. Put them to work building dams and bridges and roads in places like Detroit and fixing buildings and cleaning up places that are falling apart in our own country. Stop needing all this oil all over the world, which is why we have all these wars half the time and why we get involved in all these sectarian battles that are none of our business. It's an evil fucking world, but it's not our world to fix. If we can help, we should, it sounds contradictory, but I think sometimes, along with other people, if a lot of people agree, and it doesn't have to be necessarily through the UN, because you've got military dictatorships like Russia and China vetoing sensible, rational behavior because they don't act that way. I mean, Russia and China have, for almost their entire histories, which go back hundreds, if not thousands of years, have a habit of mass murdering their own civilians for political and cultural purposes. They are horrible dictatorships, these countries, and have been throughout their history. So they're not going to vote for any kind of democratic or equal or sensitive treatment of anybody else. They don't even understand that. They don't even act that way, right? But the United States is no better if you look at their real history. So you can't count on the Russians. You can't count on the Chinese. What I'm saying, sometimes a group of well-meaning countries, if they're really doing it without some ulterior motive of oil or money, can go in, I think, and has the right to protect one group in a country that is being mass murdered by another group. Right now in Egypt, Islamists are murdering Coptic Christians in various parts of the country. They're burning down their churches. They're burning their houses down. They're shooting them. They're locking them up. They're killing people there. This is a kind of a genocidal war that they're on the verge of in Egypt. Are we going to go in there and do that too? The world has got to get together. And let me tell you something else. The United States has not been faithfully, in good faith, trying to urge Assad and the people fighting him to negotiate in Geneva. In fact, it's the Saudis who are backing our allies, the Saudis, our good buddy, democratic friends, the Saudis, who are backing some of the worst, most vicious factions fighting in Syria. They aren't even Syrians. These are Al-Qaeda, and these are other people that the Saudis, who is one of the worst nations on earth, are backing with money and weapons. And for all I know, poison gas. They're backing them. The opposition in Syria has about 15 different groups of militant Islamic and otherwise crazy thugs fighting who aren't even Syrians, who don't even belong there, right? And the United States, and the United States whose ally is Saudi Arabia, and this is where we get some of our quote-unquote intelligence, the groups on the other side in Syria, they don't want to negotiate. They want the United States to come in there. Listen to this now, because it's essential to remember this. They want the United States to come in there and beat up on Assad so then they can go to the negotiations in Geneva. The other side in Syria, backed up by Saudi Arabia, does not want to negotiate peace. They want the United States to beat up on Assad and to blow his planes out of the air and to blow up his military facilities so that then they'll go and negotiate. They want more weapons from the United States. They want to be in a stronger position, which they would be if we launched these missiles. The United States is not in good faith pushing people to go to the negotiating table. So that's another reason we have no right to be doing this. Last comment before we take calls, 866-997-4748, is there is a real question whether or not, and I keep mentioning it again and again because it's an evolving understanding of the fact that we all live in the same world, we're in the same boat. If we see this happening, should we not go in and help people? For instance, the United States sent in thousands of troops to Somalia in the early 1990s because warlords, basically just mafia thugs there, were stealing the food that the UN was trying to give starving people. After hundreds of thousands had starved to death, the UN came in there with UN troops to try to protect the food distribution. And the United States sent in troops too, of course, not want to cooperate with anybody else because we're better than everybody else. We didn't work with them. And we wound up getting in a lot of trouble and had to withdraw from Somalia. I believed that we should have sent our army and our Air Force or whatever it is, special ops people, into Somalia because people were being starved to death when the world was trying to help them. So it's not always black and white as far as I'm concerned. Anyhow, who do we have? Lloyd, is it? Lloyd, you're on, Lloyd.
Okay, thank you. I've been listening to your show on and off for a few years through Sirius Radio and enjoy it very much.
Okay, thank you.
I'm born in New York 57 years ago and have been living up in New England for the last 20 years or so.
Where in New England?
Framingham, Mass.
Okay.
I'm an elected town meeting member here. I'm not sure if are you aware what that is?
Sure.
It's just a local. I
am.
Okay.
Yeah.
Most of the country doesn't have that. But I'm a local elected Democrat. I've been a Democrat my whole life. New York, New Jersey Democrat. And so was my father, who fought in World War II. Mm. And God, where to start? I mean, you brought up so many great points over the last hour or two. And all I could say is that, and I've been working for the last 30 years at banks that you've heard of. They're worldwide, and I've had portfolios of $2 billion that I worked on. Mm-hmm. And yet, with all that, I'm as liberal as can be. And the older I get, the more liberal I become. And the reason why is because I'm a human being. I'm not sure what anybody else is. I'm really not sure what a Republican is, but I am human. And because I'm human and I have human needs, and everybody else has those same human needs, I'm a liberal. And I am unbelievably against this military action. A lot of Democrats, and I'm an active Democratic party member. I was elected 3 times to the Massachusetts Democratic Convention. I am unbelievably against this. I've called Markey's office, which incredibly he, in one of his very first senatorial votes, voted present, which to me...
Oh, I saw that.
To me, a person who grew up, like you, during Vietnam, that is an unacceptable, and to me, an impeachable offense.
Well, you should give the details here. We're talking about the Senate Foreign Relations Committee took a vote the other day, and it was 10-7 to send this somewhat amended proposal to the floor of the Senate for debate. And some people voted no, some people voted yes, and your senator voted
present.
What is his problem?
Well, because it's political, and this is why, and he was my congressman also, and because he was my congressman, and even though he's a Democrat, and I hate to say it, but I'm an honest Democrat. I'm not hypocritical. I couldn't wait to get rid of Johnson when I was a kid, and went with Eugene McCarthy, and that's why I have no problem now, because it's country over party. It's my country's laws, like the Constitution that you mentioned, over war and the war interests. Article 1, Section 8 is much more important than any party. And killing people for these make-believe, fraudulent reasons. And I've just lived too long. There hasn't been a legal war in my lifetime. Not one missile, not one bullet from our country in my lifetime has been legal. Not one. So for this president, who I voted for and worked for twice, I completely agree with you, should be impeached. And the last one, it should be a set of them, whoever's still alive.
How about a class action suit by the human beings of the United States against the presidencies?
Yeah, they should be. No, but it's unbelievably. I mean, we're talking about these arguments that they're coming up with. We're going to start bombing a country that, first of all, didn't attack Teaneck, New Jersey, or Hoboken, or Oceanside, New York. I'm not quite sure why we're thinking of sending missiles anywhere. I don't get that. I didn't get it back in 1968 when I was 14 years old, and watching B-52s drop hundreds of bombs on millions of civilians that we murdered for no reason. It's the same thing. And watching this president, a lot of people aren't old enough to remember that the Democratic Party split in the mid-'60s into a war and peace faction. And unfortunately, along with all the other events that you and I both know, helped Nixon get elected. But Humphrey wasn't honest until the last 2 weeks of that election, if you remember. And that's why we lost 68. Well, we're not being honest now with the American people. And to ask us to support dropping bombs, no, that's not acceptable. It is unconstitutional. And what you brought up before with the Republican and a few of the other people, I just want to set straight. My background is political science, and my specialty is international law. And there is a UN charter that we do have to follow. You are absolutely correct. Cannot go into this without the UN Security Council, and we cannot go into this without the Congress declaring war. There is no, the War Powers Act is horse crap.
Yeah,
it's just another way.
It's basically
to kill people.
It's constitutional. It's Constitution light, like light beer. It's bullshit. But I have to move on, take other calls. But let me ask you this one question here.
Yeah.
You mentioned the fact that. Jesus, now it slipped my mind. What was the thing you were just saying before about war powers? I'm not sure what it was. No. Here's what it is. You were talking about the UN Security Council. There's something wrong with the UN. The UN is not set up in a democratic way. What you've got is an acknowledgement that there's a handful of very powerful countries that basically
there are 5 countries.
Right, they run the world. They terrify the world. Now, now you say we should go to the UN, but every time you go to the UN, even for a decent reason to protect people who are starving to death or some genocide, you get Russia and China saying no.
Yeah, but unfortunately, that is the treaty, and that is what we have signed. Unfortunately, and you have to be. I'm sorry, you got to be consistent with the law. That is the law we signed, and we do have to change it. Yes, and actually, I'm for increasing the Security Council to 9, and including India and Brazil and a couple of other countries, and that would make it so instead of the Security Council reflecting a world of 1945 in San Francisco, where it was voted, it should be reflecting the year 2013, which is now 70, 80 years later.
All right, listen, that I think we're going to have to leave that as the answer, and that's a good answer. But we do have a lineup of calls. So
okay, thank you for your show.
Yeah, and thank you for calling. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Who do we have? Tim in Detroit. You're on.
Hey, Mike. I'd like to a little bit push back on the last caller, even though I guess he's a legal expert. I take my basis from a lawyer that I heard on BBC. He's also a UN expert. He said that if you want to do this legally, and this is what he said, you can actually go to the UN General Assembly according to a UN resolution and actually have the UN General Assembly en masse vote for authorization of force against Syria.
Isn't that what happened with Iraq? I think that's what happened with Iraq, even though they were lied to. I think it was
didn't they vote it down though? I think in that case.
I'm not really sure. I don't remember exactly. But so you're saying that it is that they can go beyond, they can go past the Security
Council. If I don't think Obama's serious about doing it anyway. I think this is purely for oil.
Oh, they don't want peace. They want war. It's clear.
And I also agree that if he does this without Congress, and there's a likely possibility he will. He should definitely be impeached. I mean, I understand the teabaggers want to impeach him anyway because he's black, but this goes beyond all of that stuff. This has to do with war and peace. This has to do with violations of international law and the violations of the Constitution. So, of course, he should be impeached, absolutely. And also, Bush should have been impeached and convicted, as well as you can go back to Clinton and Reagan and I can't remember if Carter did anything warlike, unless you want to count the hostage intervention. But I mean, you could.
Carter didn't do, as far as I know, Carter didn't do very many overt large wars or overt even small wars. But he was right there in the middle of all the overthrows, the CIA plots, assassinations, you name it.
But one last point, you can go to truthout.org. There's this article by Garrick Porter, and it kind of goes point by point all these intelligence claims by the administration, and he completely deconstructs each one. For example, this claim that the weapons were used by Assad and Assad gave the commands. No evidence for that.
No.
The claim that they had this one guy from defense in Syria talking to another guy about panicking about being found out.
Yeah, I wanted to enhance that a little bit. In fact, there is no evidence that Assad, as nasty a murderer as he is, actually ordered this. But what there is evidence is what their intercepts picked up. Well, when they're not busy spying on you and me and everybody else, when they were spying on them, what they picked up was some lower level or some middle level Syrian military officials, perhaps being the ones who did this. Maybe.
Right. It could have been a sort of an inside job to discredit Assad, or maybe this guy was working with the rebels. So everything that we've heard from Obama and Kerry is at best supposition and at worst, deception. So we have to really, really push these guys not to go to war. I mean, it's going to be more death. It's going to be more death, unfortunately, of Syrians. And who knows? This might have blowback against the United States.
Well, that's what I was saying before. I mean, I worry. I have kids, and I don't want them living in American cities. And they're decent kids, and they work hard to help other people. I don't want them blown up because we have some war-torn, brain-dead, weapons manufacturer, arrogant, patriots in Washington who think that they own the world. They can do whatever they want. Because if they send missiles into that country, it's going to remobilize everybody in the rest of the whole Arab world and even in the Muslim world who has an attitude about the United States to come here and set off bombs in this place. And I don't want that.
You remember when Clinton was in office and he kept bombing Iraq? He came up with all these excuses. Clinton
is responsible for killing hundreds of thousands of Iraqis, and people don't even know that.
Now the thing is, okay, and obviously Clinton didn't go full bore into Iraq, but I mean, I'm noticing now that it's almost like Obama wants to set up Syria for the next guy who comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, we're not going to do much. We're just going to bomb the shit out of the place.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next president, whatever party, they're going to find some excuse, some rationale. Okay, now we have to invade Syria because of X.
What I want to see is I want to see the Congress vote against him. Right? Put him in his place, put the presidency in his place. I would like to see the whole thing tip and turn around where we retreat from the world and
Absolutely.
stop interfering, stop bombing, stop assaulting people, stop corrupting people, pull everything back to the United States, put all of our money into alternative energy, and there's plenty of money to do that. Employ the armed services and the armed forces in building up America's cities and repairing roads and dams and everything else. Do that. Retreat.
We got to get rid of capitalism.
Well, but meanwhile, it's
pure democratic socialism. I mean, this is
it's time. It's time for America to retreat and take care of its own house and stop bothering other people's houses. All right, we're going to move on to it. Thanks, Tim. Who do we have? Mitchell.
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
Hey, Mitchell. How you doing?
Okay. I got a lot to say about this, but let me start with where I agree with you. Okay, and that's on the overall premise. I've looked at, on the initial micro evidence of this so far. I haven't seen enough to convince me that we should get involved with this, and I'm basing it on a couple of things. One, which you just spoke about, Ed Markey.
Mm-hmm.
When Markey actually asked some very good questions of John Kerry, and he focused a lot of his questions on the United Nations, and he wanted to know, why couldn't we wait and, see the report from the UN, and Kerry dismissed it as we're not going to get anything that we don't already know, and we are... we already know that this was chemical attacks because Iran said that it was, and he said Syria said that it was a chemical attack, even though they didn't say it was them. And he said they might have additional logistical information, but we already know this, and we should go in. And that seemed to be very dismissive during when we ran on the ramp up to Iraq. If you remember Hans Blix going in, they never found anything.
Mm-hmm.
And they said so. And even if they find something this time and they can't apportion blame, that was one of the other reasons also, that they could say what happened, but they can't, say who did it. But,
but let me add one thing to that, which is that they're thinking of a second, if it's possible, if the United States doesn't start a war, they're thinking of sending a second international team or a UN team in to find out if they could find out where it came from.
Yeah, and I think I'm all for that. And that really troubled me. That interchange. My understanding of why Markey voted president was that he felt he did not have enough. He was concerned about this. But he didn't feel that he had enough evidence to vote for an interaction, but that he was still open to seeing it, and that he could always vote against this in, the broader Senate context, even though it got out of committee. But that was my understanding so far.
All right.
But and the other reason that the other things that concerned me on this was there seemed to be no move to a diplomatic solution, and where is that, in our discussion, why isn't there an option on the table that we could pursue diplomatically? And
I don't think that the United States and its allies, quote unquote, want a diplomatic solution. Not at this point. Not at this point. They want to be winning over there. They want to have the opposition, and particularly the opposition parties and groups that they support, to be winning and to be dominant in the Civil War, and then they want to go and have negotiations. They don't want to have negotiations when Assad has the dominant hand. That's what this is all about.
Right, exactly. And those two factors alone were very disturbing to me. The other thing is that they really haven't shown, who is using the weapons. I haven't seen, they're not showing any of the intelligence. They're not showing their hand. I don't know. I don't understand why it would be so sensitive that they, if they're trying to make this case, I mean, make your case. Now, I haven't seen it. So overall, I mean, I'm in agreement. We should not get involved with this based on what I've seen so far. Where you and I initially, and we wrote about this week, I mean, now, I understand your position. I mean, you're informing yourself based on a lot of very truthful and relevant history in the United States, and I appreciate what you're saying. I don't come at it. I get a little nervous when there's a reflexive reaction to something before we've examined in some capacity what's going on.
Which is what I've been saying and what you've been saying. We don't want our government to have a reflexive reaction to something when we haven't examined it. So we agree on that.
Correct, but I don't think that we that liberals or conservatives or whatever should just, as soon as they hear that there might be an action, be against it before taking a look at it. After taking a look, just from what we could do in the public specter, I don't see a case for this. I don't see any prima facie case.
Okay.
You bring up. I find a lot of this very confusing. Obama has not been. Didn't seem like he wanted to jump into the fray in Syria. I mean, this has been going on for a couple of years now. Why? Why all of a sudden, and why with this amount of gusto? I spoke to my son about this today. He says, look, he said it is very concerning with the chemical weapons. He said, but if you're on the ground there, it probably doesn't matter whether you're getting attacked with a machine gun or with gas.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the effect is the same. I mean, he's actually dealing with the refugee situation. He's in charge of the State Department's monitoring of what the refugee dollars in Turkey. So, he's kind of involved in this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
But, but he doesn't support this either. And
good.
It's very troubling. I mean, the whole situation is very confusing.
Well, one thing, we should. It's about time we have to take a break and then come back to other calls. But I think there's one thing we could agree on. There is not enough evidence that has been shown to us, the American people, either to our representatives or to us at all. The president's going to get up and talk next Tuesday night, September 10th, the eve of 9/11. Get it? And he's going to tell us, we know they did this. You should support me. The terrorists, blah, blah, blah. He's going to be, now watch, I'm predicting this. He is going to be surrounded by so many flags. You're going to need sunglasses to watch it, right? And he's going to have generals and he's going to have people all over the place. It's going to be rah, rah, rah beyond anything you ever saw before. He's going to really pitch this shit at us, right? But he wants us to buy something and we don't even know what it is. He wants us to buy a car that has a tarp over it, right? And he wants us to buy a used car without even being able to look at it. We don't know. The president of the United States owes us, the people of the United States, whose bodies will go in and be killed and who will be sending soldiers to kill other people in our name and who are going to pay for this. He owes us a detailed explanation. And then he needs to ask us, he's to end his speech with a question. Would you like me to do this after what I've told you? Not, I am going to do this. That's what I say.
Yeah, look, in keeping with what I said before, I will listen to him with an open mind, but I'm also going to be, hopefully, a critical mind, and if I don't hear anything substantive, it won't change the way I feel right now.
Yeah, you know what? I'd like to make him go up there and stand in front of a big and large graphic copy of the Constitution of the United States, not a flag. And I don't want to see one fucking uniform around him. I'm tired of it. Anyhow, I should take a break, Mitchell.
Okay, be well.
Okay, you too. We're going to take a break. We got people on the line. Thanks for calling. Hold on. Right after the break, we go straight to your calls. Okay, Mark. Now, I know Mark does stuff. I don't do anything. I'm too old. I just talk. All right, so who do we have? Leon in Texas.
Hey.
Hey.
Are you broadcasting on Sirius? Because XM temporarily took you off the air.
Did they? They will do that if there's, that they always do that if there's too much sports. I think they use the XM channel for the sports overflow, which I guess shows you how much importance the management of the radio station attributes to war. But go ahead.
They never do it at Fox News, though. They're always on there.
Yeah, but, well, I shouldn't say that. I love Sirius. Everything they do is right. Go ahead.
Well, no, I have no XM. But anyway, I don't want to go just in Syria neither because there ain't nothing to win there, But I'm not for impeachment if he would decide to do it by himself, because I'm thinking we gotta blame the Republicans on this thing too, because for the last 5 years we didn't have a normal Washington. I mean, they obstructed and they filibustered and everything. They never gave any kind of bills or anything, any discussion or debate like Washington of 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, so if they would respect it, Obama, like other presidencies, and don't kid yourself, Assad's sitting over there watching all this too, and they said, well, Obama ain't going to get the support of the Congress, so we're going to roll the dice, thinking that he ain't going to do it.
Well, I suppose there is that point of view, as a lot of people say, and in fact, there's been comments by national leaders in various places. Some of them are allies, saying that they think the man is weak. But that's a discussion that bears a lot of this,
Yeah, I'm just a truck driver, and I heard some very good callers, got good education, political science education.
Yeah.
But I would say if you want to impeach Obama, let's impeach Reagan posthumously.
You mean you want to dig him up and put him on trial? I'm all for that. Let's do it.
And then we can put on his library that he was impeached because of Iran-Contra or something, or just because you guys won't.
You know what? I think that's a great idea. I say dig him up and put him on trial. We should do it right around Halloween, and impeach him. Good idea.
Impeach both together. You want to impeach Obama?
Yeah.
We put on there that we impeach Reagan right alongside of him.
Johnson too. Let's impeach Johnson because he lied to us about the Vietnam War. Let's do it. And Nixon. Let's impeach. Let's dig them all up and impeach him.
And impeach Reagan just because you guys just won't quit kissing his ass.
All right. I got to move on. Take another call. Thank you. Who do we have? Joy in California. You're on.
Yes. I'm calling, just on this very subject having to do with impeaching and the imperial presidency and the police state.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it was on Democracy Now!, but I think it's really true that Obama passed a bill under the radar while he's, wanting to attack Syria. He passed a bill to give immunity to the previous administration.
Well, I have no idea about that, but he can't pass a bill. Congress has to pass a bill. He would sign a bill, but I don't know if he did that or not.
Oh, I hope somebody else heard it, because I think it fits into this whole picture of the progression of this police state that we're dealing with.
Yeah, it would be interesting if he was expressing an interest in pardoning people before him, because basically he's just doing that for himself, for the next person who gets in, because he, what he should have done the first day was indicted all these other people.
He's doing it for himself because of what he plans to do next, and I'm glad, the American people are waking up.
Well, that's good. I'm glad too. And, after all, the man has a Nobel Peace Prize. Unbelievable. All right. Who do we have? Mary in Iowa. You're on, Mary. Mary, you there? We got to move on. Who do we have? Roy. Roy, is it? Roy.
Yep, Roy in Wisconsin.
Okay, go ahead.
You're talking about if when we start going into Syria, and it's going to get hot and heavy, it's going to get escalate out of control, and they're going to come over here with bombs. They don't have to do that. Do you remember 3 or 4 years ago what Russia did to Estonia because the Estonians wanted to move a statue of some communist leader, and they shut the banking system down for a week? So all they have to do is mess around with our rickety internet system here for payments of fuel, like the Comdata cards, the Visa, shut everything down, And hey, they don't need to use the bomb. They'll just starve you.
Well, that's true. But if all that stuff goes down, how will we know it's the terrorists or the NSA?
Well, already the Syrian Electronic Army.
Right, the Syrian Electronic Army, my favorite army.
Right. Yeah, your favorite army. And they shut down the New York Times, and I think there's some word.
That's right.
The other day too.
They did. They shut the New York Times down. I wonder who the Syrian Electronic Army actually represents in the world. In other words, who are they a proxy for?
Well, guess,
I don't know.
So it wouldn't take much.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Truck. Com data basically collapses on its own, under its own weight. Where the whole internet system is on a rickety foundation to begin with in the country. Nobody has hardened up the system. You can just break into anything you want and shut it down. So hey, there you go. You don't need.
Wait, yeah, that's interesting you mention that, because here's a tremendous irony, and this is inevitable, right? We just found out just the other day, just yesterday, another revelation from Mr. Snowden, that the NSA forced. Who knows if they forced, but they cooperated and forced gigantic software companies that build all this software that the entire internet is based on all our email and everything else. They forced them to build what's called back doors into these things originally so that they could get in the back door and get information out. But here's the tremendous irony. Because they built a weak spot or a back door into all this stuff that we all use all the time, other people can use this door too.
Yes, bingo.
There you go.
Got it.
There you go.
What you've been using.
There it is.
So make sure you got a little bit of food in the house, because if we shut down, there's only 3 days of food in the grocery stores and the warehouses, if that.
Well, what kind of food should I get?
Get something maybe freeze-dried.
Freeze-dried.
You can boil, with a little canteen. Your gas might be shut off. Your electric might be shut off. Who knows?
Okay, so listen, I'll get some candles.
Yeah, get some of that
flashlights,
camping equipment,
canned pork and beans, Spam.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, it's so
Spam is good, yeah.
Where am I going to get my gluten-free stuff?
Oh, hey,
Oh man, I'll be in trouble. I'm going to have a bad stomach ache if there's World War III.
You'll be looking at the stray cats and dogs in the street, So
there's an idea. There's an idea. I think both of us have dragged this conversation down too far. And we're going to move. I'm only saying it because sometimes it's so horrible you have to laugh. Right? It's too horrible.
Yeah. Well, it's look it up. What they did to Estonia.
All right.
That was a little test. In the Economist.
I got to move on. I got a call from the Syrian Electronic Army on the phone.
There you go.
Okay. Adios. Mary in Iowa, you're on.
Okay. I'm eating. Sound a little funny.
You're what?
This is the second time.
You're eating. What are you eating? What are you eating?
That my Sirius XM has been off.
Oh.
The history, this is a very small town.
Oh.
History of television in our town is not very good. They had cable. Then
Mary, what's this got to do with Syria?
Well, right now you're off the air.
On XM? Is it on?
And they told me that you would be on Monday from 12 a.m. to 3 a.m.
See, this is what happens. I mean, people on Sirius can't hear. People on XM can't hear me now. Occasionally, I think it's XM that cuts out, and they put on a sports channel. If this happens to you and you find out about it,
because it's a sports channel.
So if this happens to you and it's happened before, look, you're paying for this. It's up to you to complain about it. I don't like it because
I did,
yeah.
And also on free speech, on television, Amy Goodman, they had all the programs mixed up, and I could not get my Sirius radio to work. And I called into free speech, and then I finally called the office closest to here in Storm Lake, and they told me that they had nothing to do with that.
Right.
I called free speech about 3 or 4 times.
I don't know what that is. What is free speech?
Well, Amy Goodman and.
Oh, you mean Democracy Now? Democracy Now?
Democracy Now.
Right. Okay.
Okay. I couldn't get my radio would not work for over a week, and
well, so listen. I'm gonna
all these.
Mary. I got to move on unless you want to talk about Syria because I got other calls.
Okay. Well, I do not want more war. I just want to say that, but I'm kind of worried about the way they're doing this.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks for calling, Mary. Who do we have?
All right.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, goodbye. Who do we have? We have nobody. Okay, sorry, Mary, but we have to stick to the subject here. Yeah, I mean, this happens here. I get lots of emails. I get complaints from people. What happened to you? You went off the air. Like I say, the only explanation I ever get when I get these emails and then I ask my program director is that Sirius XM sometimes takes the XM channel, I think it is, and uses it for sports programming during the last hour of my show. Do I like that? Obviously not. Should you like it? If you don't, and you're paying for it, I guess you should complain about it. I mean, I would. I think it's unfortunate because we've got life and death issues here, and I don't think it should be happening. But that's what the management decides, and that's that. There's nothing I can do about it. All right. When it comes to, I think when most of us are in agreement here, and I say it's becoming more and more interesting all the time because over the last couple of months with all these NSA revelations and with this activity in Syria, what we see here is an executive branch which is out of control. They are spending billions and billions of dollars, trillions of dollars. If you go back far enough, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, they're spending trillions of dollars. We're broke in this country. States are laying off teachers. Cities are laying off firemen, and cops and prisons are being, police departments are being privatized. Hospitals and clinics are being closed down. Roads are split and broken and falling apart. Dams break, bridges break. The whole country is falling apart. It's non-functional. And yet we managed to spend $1.4 trillion in the last 12 years on wars, either based on lies or from which no good can come. And clearly, our government, our administration, including the Congress, which has gone along with this and maybe now finally is woken up or awakened, whatever the correct word would be, clearly the government is out of control. We have no say in our government anymore. Every 2 years, every 4 years, they ask for us to come out and vote. They campaign, they shake hands, they smile, they promise anything that we want, and we get to choose between the Democrats or the Republicans. What saps they take us for, and you know what? Probably they should in general because we keep doing it. Every time they say, hey, this is a genuine Rolex and it only costs $10, we buy it from them. As long as we keep doing that, they're going to keep cheating us. The Democrats and the Republicans are what's called a duopoly. They are an apparent double version of what is really only one thing: a corporate police state, a fascist government. And I am not using that word in an extreme or unthoughtful way. We have a corporate-controlled security police state. And if you hear Nancy Pelosi or Harry Reid or Eric Cantor or John Boner or whatever his name is, or if you hear Mitch McConnell or Mitt Romney or President Obama, you're hearing the same voice in different bodies, speaking with a different tone of voice. You're hearing the same voice speaking to you from the same place. It's money land. It's power land. If we don't drag the Democratic Party all the way over to the left in primaries and defeat the hack Democrats who are prostitutes for corporations, if we don't do that, we have no chance at a democracy. If we don't run legitimate third-party candidates in primaries at every lower level and build up to state level and then eventually to national level, we will still have this endless advance to an imperial, police state, and this endless advance to the rich owning 99% of everything in the country and you basically working for them like a serf in the Middle Ages. That's what we've got here. And we are finally waking up. In Congress now, they may in fact vote against this proposal. I really hope they do. I would find that one of the first encouraging signs in decades that the country is waking up and the balance of power is restored. Everything needs to be in balance. Your body and your mind, your family, your friendships, your job, everything needs to be imbalanced, or there's trouble, or there's misery, or there is loss, or everything starts to go haywire. Our government is way out of balance. I mean, our environment is out of balance, right? Our health generally is out of balance. Our culture is out of balance. Death, superficiality, bizarre, amoral sexuality. The whole thing is turned upside down. And our government is out of control. It's out of balance. I can only hope that next week they vote, Congress of the United States votes against this president. Let him sit in the White House and feel miserable. Let him think he's a failure. Good. It's a good lesson for him, and it's a good lesson for democracy. All right, that's it for this week. Next week,